Welcome, everybody, to the 13th episode of the Deadliest Warrior podcast. Today, I am your host, Craig Taylor.
Hi, I'm Lucas.
I'm representing Alexander the Great, and my name is Matt, and this is lucky number 13.
Yeah.
Yes, and then on the
How's your
back
guess?
there...
I'm representing Attila.
Yeah. On the back there, we have Brendan on
The ones and
mic
twos.
and the ones
Hello.
and twos. The Brendan cam. Yeah, today we're talking about the second named warrior episode, Deadliest Warrior, Attila the Hun versus Alexander the Great. Any initial thoughts on this episode? At least what you remember as a kid?
I remember it being one of the dumbest matchups for weapons.
Yeah.
I remember being really pissed off after watching it. I was very upset. So I went into it. On my first rewatch, I was upset again, but I think I've been able to put into words why it upsets me, and I am going into this podcast episode with some good vibes. So
One of the best guest stars on this episode. One of my favorite guest stars.
yeah,
Really?
another UFC meme.
Yeah, it's
I
just
love
another
it.
UFC fighter.
Yeah.
Sean.
Yeah. So I guess we can just get right into it with stats of the Warriors. So Attila, he was born in 406 AD, died 453. Height of 5'6", so pretty short king. Weight 145 pounds and armor of leather lamelier. Alexander the Great, 340 to 323 BC. Height of 5'7", also kind of a short king. 155 pounds, bronze cuirass armor. And the difference of these warriors is almost 1,000 years, which I think might be the greatest gap in Deadliest Warrior.
It's gotta be
Yeah,
Keeper of Lore, do you have anything?
I think the greatest gap, there is even a greater gap between Sun Tzu and Vlad the Impaler, which
I
we
could
see
believe that,
later this
yeah.
season. And in season 3, there's a pretty damn big gap between Hannibal and Genghis Khan.
Well, what
as
about
well.
zombies and vampires? Because they can, it's got to be.
the gap between a good show and a bad show? I do want to mention
Downhill.
the gap between one end of the shark and the other end of the shark.
with the stats, our boy, one of our longtime viewers, the real Shino, emailed us some notes on this episode. And he had some notes about their stats. So speaking of Short King, Shino says Attila... Oh, I won't go into Attila's stuff. I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, I got that right here.
He said Alexander the Great was a bit too tall on the show, actually, based on estimates around paintings and the average height of his age. A height of 5'0" to 5'4" is more accurate. So, Short Kings,
Little guy.
truthfully.
Yeah, we had our first write-in for this one, as Matt said, which was the real Shino. I'm sure he's like, he was like itching in his boots waiting for us to mention this.
Yeah.
So just for short, I'm going to reference him a lot through this episode where he put in notes. I'm just going to call him Shino. So
Yeah.
you're Shino now.
Important to know, real Shino, I did fact check most of his research, and it came out legit. I did not fact check this average height thing, so I'm just throwing it out there.
I have a little bit something interesting to go into where, the show portrays him, as Craig said, Attila the Hun is 5'6". And Shino wrote into us, reported that his height was actually 4'11", and there's reports that he could be up to 5'2". Now, me doing my job as host, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't fact check this. And
Except
Shino
you're not host.
is indeed, I'm a host. Shino is indeed correct. And one thing, I kind of stepped a little bit farther into this. So if he was 4'11", that is 1 inch taller than what would be classified as a little person by today's standards. And so I looked into, did he have like dwarfism or disease or anything? And as far as I can tell, the answer is no. But there is a large debate on whether riding a horse during childhood may cause bow-leggedness, which would lead to a shorter stature. And then I also found out there is no medical link between riding horses and bow-leggedness, but that's kind of like an urban legend, myth. And in fact, it may actually increase your joint flexibility and help you. On the last side note, it's a known fact that I don't like horses.
Let's say our local horse expert.
And Shino mentioned something about Attila's armor, but I'm sure we're going to get into that later in the episode.
Yeah, whenever
when
we
they
want
bring
to
the
touch on
up.
armor, I'll cover that.
He talked about Alexander's too, and I'll get to it when we,
Also, whenever you talk about Attila's height, that's almost like what? Like It's over 2000. Oh, I know he was AD, so it'd be about 1500 years ago.
Yeah,
So-
people
were
are
just shorter.
Yeah.
But 4'11" is probably like a little even short. I feel
I like to think that just by stature alone, I could beat like the best swordsman from back then.
Yeah.
I could just beat him up or something.
I'm 6'3" and just walk up and I'm just like, "What's up, little man?"
Yeah. Also culturally too. I mean, Hungarians, like, could they be considered basically like Caucasian? I mean, are they more like Asian?
I don't know. It's
Well, the only reason I say that is
what are
'cause-
any of us? You
Yeah.
know?
The territory that they're in is kind of like where Asia itself and Europe kind of just, it's like the middle zone. So there could be like, some blending of culture.
Yeah,
and-
I actually have sort of a question on that, but my point being is whenever I look through my manga data books, a lot of times you look at like these characters that are supposed to be Japanese, and you'll have this like guy who's supposed to be this giant dude, and it's like he's like 6 foot tall, like 120 pounds. And it's so different cultures.
I couldn't imagine someone that tall.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so obviously, like depending on like where you're from, that could be normal, but interesting. I didn't think about that. So a little bit about just kind of like the pre-game, like random shit that happens in the episode. Dorian says he brings his expertise from a trauma hospital to Deadliest Warrior, which I don't know how many people are being treated for ballista wounds at that hospital, but I just thought it was kind of a funny line. We get an amazing CG rendering of a horse, which rivals the Stingray.
I love that.
Yeah.
The little CG horse that is green screened onto Max's computer.
Max, like he's like hacking the horse to like run, or, like I don't know. I'll put it on the screen. It's so funny. So just to sort of dip our toes in the water, Matt, I was wondering if you can give a brief overview of who Alexander the Great was, what made him special, and then maybe some interesting info that you found while researching.
Yeah, so obviously Alexander the Great is the type of figure that you could do a whole podcast series on. So I cribbed it down to like 4 paragraphs here. I did my best. So Alexander the Great was the heir to Macedonia. This is what we're given on the show, that he was the heir to Macedonia. His father was assassinated, and Alexander took over the war machine, revolutionized warfare and weapons tactics, and he conquered a huge area of land with a relatively small army.
I like how you put like, this is how they say it on the show. Because I put that in too, because if it sounds really dumb, but it's just something the show says.
That is like verbatim what the show says about him. So I wrote that the show actually gets, they had to crib even more than I did. They had to put it in like 2 sentences. I wrote the show gets it right that Alexander's father was a warrior who had united the tribes of Macedonia. Alexander inherited the throne after his father's assassination, which there are many theories as to who killed Philip, but I've thought it was interesting. They hint that Attila the Hun might have killed his father, and there is a theory that Alexander the Great may have been involved in his father's assassination as well.
I feel like if you're a powerful person, like before history is like definitively recorded, you're always going to be accused of, did he kill his father?
Did he kill his dad? Alexander was schooled by some of the most brilliant philosophers of the time, including Aristotle. Ever heard of him? And some brilliant, and his father's military success led to Alexander having a lot of experienced commanders around him to not only train him but work with him in council. Alexander was also told by his mother from a young age that his real father was Zeus and that Alexander was descended from the gods.
Yeah, I banged Zeus.
Yeah, well, she like told it to him, and that's what she said, that Zeus came to her, and Philip was not his real father, but Zeus was. And you have to keep in mind, Philip was gone a lot, off making war and conquering tribes, and so Alexander the Great spent a lot of time with his mom. And imagine the person you spend the most time with telling you over and over again that you are, the son of the god of gods. Basically.
Especially if she's Angelina Jolie.
You're right. Yes.
Oh, no, not that Zeus. Here's Zeus.
This is important to note because of his ego and his obsession with his legacy. And that's what drove him to these expansionistic endeavors. And he ended up, after his conquest, he named 20 cities after himself. Like more than 20 cities he named Alexander, just or Alexander, Alexandria. Like, dude had an ego. First, when he came to power, Alexander would fulfill the dreams of his father by conquering all of Greece. And he would then invade the massive Persian Empire that extended from modern Egypt all the way to Pakistan. And Alexander's army was often much smaller than his Persian foes, but he was able to win using ingenuity on the battlefield. And eventually, after defeating the Persians, he would advance his armies into northern India, only returning home after his men grew exhausted from years of fighting. They hadn't been home in years. They've been on the road campaigning, and they just wanted to go home. So, according to historical record, Alexander never lost a battle, and he left no heir to his empire. And it is said that on his deathbed, they asked him to name an heir, and he simply said, "To the strongest." And this led his empire to a dissolve immediately after his death, and it plunged into civil war amongst his various generals.
What a just meme to drop on your deathbed and
Yeah.
It's like
peace out.
It's like an anime opening. It's like the beginning of One Piece or something.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's great to point that out and the ego thing to show that Alexander was not interested in conquering the world to drive some kind of vision. I think it was all, I just want to be remembered, and I don't really give a shit who takes over after me because I don't care about any of these people, basically. So last thing I have written here is that this show often takes a lot of cues from movies and shows. So I have to mention the Oliver Stone Alexander movie, which is like, theatrical cut is like 3 hours long, and the director's cut that I'm not going to watch is 4 hours.
I'll never watch either of those. Too long.
Imagine what you could do in 4 hours.
It's critically panned, but I actually, in my research, found that obviously there's a lot of scenes he couldn't have known about, but I found that there's a lot of historically accurate stuff in that movie. I've never watched it really in full, so I won't recommend it, but I will recommend the History Buffs video on the movie, which I'll send the link to Craig so you can put it in the description. That video about the movie is very fascinating, and it touches into a lot of real Alexander history. So that's what I've got.
Cool. Moving on to Attila the Hun. Lucas, to kind of get you started, I want to ask you a very ignorant question that I wonder if some other people might be wondering. What is the difference between Attila the Hun and Genghis Khan? Because I feel like as a kid, they're presented as like the same.
According to Disney, they are the same person.
Yeah. And I mean, I actually didn't realize until watching this episode that Hun meant like Hungarian. I thought that they were like this tribe in Asia that just like got really, whatever. But like they're Hungarian. So that surprised me when I learned hey, these are two different people.
I feel like I felt like that for a really long time too. And
it's sort of our Western media,
Yeah, but there are some similarities which we'll get to between them. But
yeah, it seems like the Huns are kind of more towards the Europe side also.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, that's why I was like, are they? I mean, I don't want to get too into race, but are they white? Are they Asian? What persuasion are they?
To not sound like a total idiot, I'm just gonna say I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
To not make some dumb statement.
Yeah, but I feel like Attila the Hun is mostly presented as this type of Asian barbarian.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to learn that he's Hungarian.
I remember first time I watched this show, and I'll admit this, I knew nothing about the Huns, and outside of Disney's Mulan, and in that movie, the Huns are like the Mongols.
Yeah.
And when I learned that when I got a little older, I was like, yo, what the fuck?
Yeah, that's probably where that seed was planted in my head.
That's pretty racist.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. They're the Huns.
It doesn't help that as I get into some of this history too, because I cover a little bit on the history of the Huns. There's not definitive records of many things. It's kind of hard to.
Yeah,
because it was almost before definitive written history, and anything that is written is hard to translate now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll dive right into it. I'm seriously going to try to keep this short, but on Wikipedia and everything I found was like a novel. Like you could literally, just like you said, you could do like a whole podcast on the history of Attila the Hun. There are so many rulers, so many people, so many things that happened. I'm going to just try to hit like some of the highlights here. So who was he? He was the ruler of the Huns from year 434 until his death in March 453. He was also leader of what was known as the tribal empire, consisting of Huns, Ostrogoths, sounds like a killer metal band, the Alans,
Or like an Adult Swim show.
and the Bulgars. During his reign, he was one of the most feared enemies of the Western and Eastern Roman empires. And his history is really difficult to research because the only complete sources are written in Greek and Latin by pretty much the enemies of the Huns. Like, a lot of it is from the Romans, and that's who he was fighting most of the time. So they're not going to write great things about him,
Right, yeah.
which is potentially why he's looked at as such like an evil, like maniacal man, because the only records are from the people who didn't like him that he was fighting. Don't get me wrong, he was pretty bad. But the Huns themselves were a group of Euro-Asian nomads appearing from east of the Volga who migrated further into Western Europe. So that's who the specific group of the Huns are. They just kept moving over towards Europe. The origin and language of the Huns has been subject of debate for centuries. They may have spoken a Turkic language closest to modern Chavush. Don't know what that is. Attila has a debated birthday of about 395. His father was Munzuk and was brother of Oktor and Ruga, who reigned jointly over the Hunnic Empire. So his family was from noble lineage, which I think the show gets that wrong. They just kind of say he was the leader because he was the most feared. No, he was of noble lineage. During his upbringing, the Huns had dominated a vast territory and became a great power by the time he came of age. And the death of Ruga left Attila. I think I couldn't really find what happened to Oktor, the other brother of his father. But whenever Ruga passed, him and his brother Bleda, I think it's his name, took control of the united Hun tribes. And they've been at war with the Romans for a while and negotiated a temporary treaty in exchange for some Hun prisoners. They left their encampments in Roman territory and moved back to the Hungarian plains. Now, in the year 440, they appeared in Roman territory, attacking merchants, and crossed the Danube and laid waste to the cities of Illyricum and Vidasium.
So a lot of this is like modern, like Western Russia and then Eastern Europe and Germany, sort of.
Yeah, even like down to like Italy at some points, like kind of right above what you would think of as the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And so Attila continued leading the army and took the city of Singadum. These are some like crazy long city names. He then continued the campaign in 443 using battering rams and rolling sieges for the first time. This is all going to lead into how he becomes Attila, like the leader. So the second treaty was then created, with much harsher terms for the Romans. The Huns withdrew again, but shortly after, his brother Bleda died, making Attila the sole ruler of the Huns. Now, having that role, he rode into the Roman Empire again in 447 until he again defeated the Romans, inflicting heavy losses, and the Huns were left unopposed and rampaged through the Balkans. Attila then threatened to attack Western Roman Empire. So he's kind of been, there's the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire, and he's just been kind of beating the shit out of the Eastern Roman Empire, and now he's threatening the Western Roman Empire. So a woman by the name of Horana said Attila a plea for help and the engagement ring given to her by a Roman senator who she was forced to betroth. Horana was the sister of the Western Roman Emperor's ruler. It is debated that she did not intend it as a proposal for marriage, but that's how Attila took it, and he accepted, asking for half of the Western Empire as dowry. Horana was then exiled to prevent this request. Many battles ensued. Attila was much more evenly matched in the Western Roman Empire, but the Huns continued to push further until the Battle of Calacatin Plains, which is regarded as a strategic victory for the Visigothic Roman alliance. This left Attila retreat and disarray, and the Romans had the appearance of being victorious. Attila returned in 452 to renew his marriage claim, invading and ravaging Italy along the way, because that's what you do. Again, a convoy was sent out to negotiate a treaty, and he accepted and went back to his homeland, leaving his Huns behind. So the East Roman Empire, because he's messing around the West, the East is like, we're all gonna, hit him from this side, but it was after he retreated. So they came in and kind of wiped out all the Huns he left behind. So this caused Attila to kind of gather together and start heading for Rome, and the Romans were refusing to pay the tribute, which was in the treaty. So then he went to Rome. Then after he leaving Italy, he returned to his palace with a plan to strike at a Constantinople and reclaim a tribute when he died in the early months of 453. All account claims that Attila was at a feast celebrating his latest marriage to a girl named Adelco, and he died during the feast from severe bleeding. He may have had a nosebleed and choked to death in a stupor, or might have succumbed to internal bleeding, possibly due to ruptured esophageal varices. However, the Roman accounts report he was stabbed by the blade of his wife, but most reject these accounts. So Attila the Hun being very big in I'm almost done. Being very big in folklore and in stories for a very long time, and has a legacy, probably a bad one, but he will live on.
Matt, your mom is blowing up my phone right now.
No, yeah, that's me. I'm sending you my links from this for this episode.
Yeah.
Now, I just read you something about this big. If you look even on his Wikipedia history, it is like to the ceiling, to the floor. So it's convoluted. It's like the Game of Thrones plot. If I just try to like sum up Game of Thrones in like
Yeah, I was going to
30
ask you
seconds.
when does Attila the Hun marry Daenerys Targaryen?
Oh yeah,
and
right at the end here. It is seriously, go look it up yourself, read Attila the Hun's history, try to make sense of it, and try to, if you want to challenge, try to shorten it into like a page.
well, that's one of the things that's challenging.
Wait, does after Attila's death, does his horse destroy the Hunnic throne?
Yeah. The it's crazy. It's like there's like a painting of like the Hun, Attila the Hun, he's like standing there, and then the horse just like is like back there. So like Attila's like a horse guy. It's amazing shot that they're going to study for generations.
Lucas has never seen Game of Thrones, so he doesn't understand all this crap.
Yeah. well, what I will say though is not to say oh, woe is us, but that's probably the most challenging thing for us is when you look up a guy like Attila the Hun or Alexander the Great, and you pull up that Wikipedia page and you're like, oh my god.
Well, one goal I always have with this podcast is the fact that none of us are like academics or historians, and so I almost think it makes it better when we tackle the stuff that they get wrong on Deadliest Warrior.
Yeah.
Because it's
so basic that we know.
It's us showcasing how quickly we were able to find and fact check this stuff. You know, you don't need to study this stuff for years to find, oh, they got the armor wrong.
Yeah.
A knight never used this weapon, stuff like that. So, we do the best we can on here.
Yeah. Our man Shino brought up that the show portrays Attila as this bloodlusted man who would kind of kill first and ask us questions later. But he said, this is from Shino, if you paid his protection fee and didn't outright provoke him, he would leave you alone.
Wait, didn't he like ask East Rome to pay tribute? They did. He asked for double. They did. So he asked for double. They did. And he asked for double. They did. He asked for double, and they couldn't do it anymore, so he attacked.
Yeah, if you look at all those treaties, because I even mentioned like 3 of them, but there's even more. Most of those treaties were like Rome paying ridiculous amounts of money to them to, not get like
fuck off
raised. Yeah. But in my research, most accounts of Attila from Rome people didn't like him, so they're skewed. But a Roman historian called Jordanes, who I'll bring up later, actually noted that Attila was restrained in action, mighty in counsel, gracious in supplements, and lenient to those who were received into his protection.
Jeez, Jourdain, if you love him so much, why don't you marry him? Jeez.
Yeah. Well, that was rousing.
Yeah, you can go ahead and just cut all that when it's really boring on the edit.
We'll leave it all in for those.
You did pretty good.
Yeah. For those that don't want to listen, just go to the timestamps. But if you're hearing this, you watch the whole thing, so you won't hear this. So anyway, moving on to the experts. So starting off with the Attila experts, we have Robert Borsos. And I kind of had a feeling with this one, we're not going to find anything juicy. It is nice when we get someone with a history, but most of these people are pretty like milquetoast. Nothing against them, but nothing really like exciting. So we'll probably blaze through this. Robert Borsos is listed as a mounted weapon specialist and a Hungarian native, a descendant of a Hun clan, which I think that he's just Hungarian. So
that's a DW favorite. Is saying that this guy's Japanese. He's descended from samurai.
Yeah. I mean, maybe, but
I don't even think he's Hungarian. What I found is he was born in British Columbia and Canada. So I'm gonna hit the doubt button.
I don't know. I think he is because he kind of has an accent.
He does.
I think he has so he is legit when it comes to archery. He runs a Kasai Archery Club, and I think it might be in Canada. I mean, I didn't honestly look up where he was born, but I think he is legit on that front.
Sorry, I put he grew up in British Columbia, so he necessarily might not have been born there.
Yeah, dude, he was from like a clan, Hungarian.
Yeah, come on, dude.
Yeah. He actually knew Attila.
Yeah. Moving on to Sean Pennington, who I think is kind of the standout expert on the show, just because of like his aura.
He reminds me of Xander Corvus. Google it with safe search off.
With Robert, I found a funny quote he put on on his own website on that horse thing. He quoted as I think he plays Attila in the reenactment, because he said, "I played Attila the Hun facing Alexander the Great on a show called Deadliest Warrior, and Alexander the Great never lost a battle except in Hollywood."
Really? Well, we'll have to look, because I didn't catch that.
Yeah, and he said his favorite story his father used to tell him was that his father was a soldier in the Yugoslavian army cavalry defending against the invading Hungarian army, and he only had 5 bullets. And then as he got older, he found out that was a completely BS story. But that's the story. That's the reason he got into horse archery, because he liked that story.
You know who was in the Yugoslavian army? Nico Bellic.
Yeah,
I think, isn't that right?
I can't remember.
I can't remember either. Maybe. I think that's right. Brendan, fact check that.
Jamie, can you pull that up?
Yeah. So going back to Sean Pennington, he's listed as an ancient combat specialist and a spear and dagger specialist. Not unrelated to him, there's a horrible fake mustache in the B-roll during his intro. And I think just like the one Viking, I think this is a woman. So
it might
you know what I'm talking about?
It might be.
I think it looks like a woman.
Yeah,
with the face structure, but
the one with the blonde hair that gets an axe to the head.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah,
it looks like that one shot from the Viking where
it is uncanny. And meaning uncanny as in like it disturbs you to see it because it looks so fake.
Yeah,
you know?
The mustache is one thing, but it's just something. It's like in the uncanny valley. But unrelated to Sean Pennington. Related to Sean Pennington, I found absolutely nothing in research. I couldn't even find his IMDb page.
Yeah, I found nothing on this guy.
It doesn't help that his name's kind of common.
I put that too. All I put is they classify him as a spear and dagger specialist, but anytime you see this guy like wielding a sword, he looks like a high school kid who just bought like a flea market sword, and he's recording himself in his bedroom like swinging it around.
I did note that with the Sword of Mars, you see Sean. I'm sorry, Sean, if you're legit, but he's going like.
It looks like
I'm like.
It looks like if you handed me a sword and try to sell this, but like make it look like you know what you're talking
about.
Like
that's like me fucking around in my house, you know.
I want to see like what is a certificate that just says like, "Oh, I'm certified in spear and dagger specialist."
Don't hand me a bow.
Yeah, yeah. Don't hand me a sword.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there's like the one. I feel like they use it multiple times where he's like. At the camera.
Yeah. His like intro thing too. Yeah, it's just like they put the camera on him. They're like, it's one of those things where it's like, come on, bro, I'm recording. Do something cool.
But I have noticed it is very aesthetically pleasing to hear the narrator say, Sean Pennington.
Yeah. So going to Alexander, we have Peter Van Rossum, who is listed as a sword and shield champion. Champion according to who, I don't know. He does seem very knowledgeable, and on the aftermath seems like he really cares about the show and the outcome. Like we'll obviously get into the aftermath at the end, but he says stuff like, "Oh, I think this is the moment that Alexander really lost it," or this. And he like really cares about the show, so I give him a lot of respect. I couldn't find a lot on him. I found his defunct Facebook page where he was selling handcrafted sculptures, and he had really long hair.
Nice.
I think he comes off to me like somebody who's just very passionate about weapons and like ancient weapons and stuff like that, and he was like a good kid.
I hope he's living his best life. Yeah, I had difficulty finding anything about him. I found a Twitter account that was like at Peter Van Rossum, and the picture is kind of blurry and it kind of looks like him, but there's nothing juicy. It's like his last tweet was in 2011, whoever this guy was, and it was all tweets about like different soccer matches. So I was like, could be him, probably not.
So moving on to Kendall Wells, our last expert. Well, I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't look into Rashad Evans. I don't really count him as an expert, but if you guys have something you want to say about him.
I wrote a couple things about Rashad, but
you want to just go ahead?
yeah, sure. Rashad Evans, a former MMA fighter, former light heavyweight champion, and 2019 UFC Hall of Fame inductee. So he was a big name in the UFC, but of course careers are relatively short in the UFC compared to other sports because of the violent nature. I have more to say about Rashad when we get to, or just pancreation relating to the UFC in general when we get to that section. But Rashad Evans, you can find a lot about him.
Yeah. I mean, he's one of the greats. UFC.
Yep.
Watch his fights. They're good.
Will do. So Kendall Wells is listed as a bladed combat expert. So a decent bit on him. He is a stunt actor, so he's a stunt actor of the episode. Although a fun blurb on his IMDb page, it said, after studying the Meisner technique, I don't know what that is, intensely for 5 years, he became the student of sword and whip master Anthony DeLongis.
Yes, I saw that too. I read that. I was hoping you'd get it. Yeah.
Deadliest Warrior alum. And another Deadliest Warrior alum, he was on, I imagine, a few episodes of Grimm with Damian Puckler.
Oh,
Yeah.
So, and I found his Instagram. So
Damian Puckler.
that's another fun name. Not a lot of names that aren't fun for him to say.
That's true. He is Hollywood's go-to narrating guy if you want like fantasy or history, because you want to have that British. I don't know if he's British or not, but you want like that British Isles accent.
Yeah.
You know?
Hey, I can't wait till we get to Coley Mustafa Speaks.
The only thing cooler than that is the guy on the movie trailer. In a world where everyone is dead.
They couldn't get him for Deadliest. Yeah. So, moving on to the pregame predictions. I mean, like you've probably anticipated, one person says Attila, one person says Alexander the Great.
You think they do that on purpose?
Yeah, it's almost
I
like
think they do that on purpose. Yeah.
It's almost like the producer has them say that.
Yeah. Dorian, he says something very curious, not even about the matchup, but I was sitting in my chair thinking about this for, I'm not kidding, 5 minutes. He says,
being a physician for MMA fights, when you actually evaluate a fight, you look at who's scrappier. I think Attila the Hun might actually have the advantage here.
So I have several questions with that statement. One, do MMA doctors evaluate the fight?
Like, I think he's just trying to use that as experience.
Yeah.
You know? Like, he knows more than you at home watching
What?
pay-per-view.
Define an MMA doctor also. You mean a regular doctor?
Yeah, right, exactly.
They just go to the hospital after the fight if they're injured.
Two, how does being scrappy equate to success in MMA?
Yeah.
It
I mean, and also like define that term, like scrappier. And the fact that like Attila the Hun is labeled as scrappier than Alexander, I'm like, what does that mean? Like,
because he's a barbarian, so that means
yeah,
he's
it
scrappier.
feels very stereotypical to me. Like, well, you know, one's a savage and the other is like a dainty noble, and it's
paint
like
the narrative.
It's like, yeah, but they've both like killed people in combat, so I don't understand.
The
Like,
whole like scrappy fight, I guess you'd think more of like the Street Fighter guy. Like anyone current in UFC, maybe like Jorge Masvidal, you'd be like, oh, he's a scrappy fighter or something, but he lost his last fight. You know?
yeah, right. Yeah,
That didn't make him better.
The doctor's sitting there like, oh my God, I really thought he had it. He was scrappier.
He was scrappier, man. How'd he lose?
Yeah. And then I guess the other revelation is, I don't know how, they might have mentioned he was an MMA doctor. I guess being on Spike, you assume that he is.
I swear,
He's pretty busy with MMA, Deadliest Warrior, and being an actual ER doctor in Los Angeles.
I think the only other time they mention it is Apache Gladiator because
It's the first
Chuck
episode.
Liddell shows up too. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, all they would do, I imagine, at the events is just have like doctors like on standby and for like emergencies.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
does that classify someone as an MMA doctor?
I don't know. And what does any of this have to do with Attila Hun versus Alexander the Great? I don't
Nothing.
fucking know.
Right.
So
Alexander, he's just not scrappy enough.
Because Alexander's like, you know, he's like a UFC fighter back in the day.
yeah. So going on to weapons finally. So we start off with special weapons, actually.
The best one.
Makes sense.
Ballista. So stats for the ballista are a range of 500 yards, ammo 608. 4-foot bolts. Sorry. Magazine size is actually a single shot, believe it or not. Which, if you didn't need that clarified, yeah, 1 round mag.
The ballista with a 30-round mag. It's just like they're like
Just stacked up on top of each other.
So, Matt, just to get you started off, how long was the ballista actually around and used as like a
1v1 weapon.
1v1 weapon?
Well, yeah. Well, let's back up for a second. The ballista, maybe the biggest meme in our friend group outside of the stiletto, which we'll get to in a later episode.
Next week.
Yeah, well, next episode. But for right now, the ballista, we have joked about this so much. And let me start off by saying some positives you might not expect.
There are positives.
Yeah. So I think looking at this non-cynically, this weapon is on this episode because Alexander the Great, one of the things that people attribute to his army's success is that Alexander the Great employed artillery really well on the battlefield. Things like the ballista and the Gastrophetes that we see later on. But notice I said artillery. When this is introed, Peter Van Rossum describes it as the ancient world's howitzer. Now that is a Deadliest Warrior favorite, is saying this is the ancient world version of this. But this is like the most accurate they get with that. This is ancient world artillery. It is meant for an army on army conflict. This is meant to shoot a bunch of ballistas into a group of people. And when it's deployed like that, a ballista is a really effective weapon. If this was an army fight, I mean, picture 24 ballistas raining bolts into like a group of Hunnic horsemen.
They'd probably fight in the shadows.
Yes, they'd fight in the shade. But that being said, a one-on-one fight, it's a useless weapon. And it's useless almost to the degree that it's a jump the shark moment for the episode entirely. And what I mean by that is that it takes you out of it. Your suspension of disbelief just falls off. At least it did for me, even when I was young watching this. Because you don't need to be a military expert to just look at it and be like, that's useless in a one-on-one fight. Because it is. It's large. It's unwieldy.
Takes a minute to reload.
Yeah, the reload speed takes forever. It's not meant to be used for that. And they don't make this an ancient matchup that's one-on-one like they do in every other episode. They make it 3-on-3, and I think that's solely because they have a ballista.
They didn't want him because he's on horseback. They constantly go on about how they're both horseback warriors. What is he supposed to have a ballista like on top of the horse?
Yeah. Well, it's obvious that they had to give him extra guys so that Alexander the Great doesn't have to start the fight cranking a ballista.
Did they say there's 3-on-3? Because I swear to God, Jeff, at least in the aftermath, confirms or corrects somebody by saying it's 1-on-1.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't watch the aftermath.
Before,
I just go on what the sim showed us.
Yeah.
3-on-3.
I'm gonna be covering the sim today. Right as he does the, like as he's saying, he's putting the info in. He says we're gonna be giving each of them like a small band of men.
Yeah.
And then then he hits the enter.
Because if it's a one-on-one, it makes no sense. Attila makes sense because all of Attila's weapons can be deployed by him alone on horseback. If Alexander the Great is by himself, he's working on the ballista, and then he's got to pull up this big Gastrophetes, which we'll talk about later. And then only after he wastes his time with those things can he then hop on his horse and use his actual weapons.
Yeah. I mean, I'll have to look back at my notes. But yeah, I'm pretty sure. I mean, Deadliest Warrior might have contradicted themselves. I can't believe it, but it's entirely possible.
Well,
Wow, I can't believe that this show would fuck something up so
the thing
bad.
that's great is we get the ballista. It's a big joke, but it's over and done with. At least we don't get anything like that on the show again.
Yeah,
Yeah,
true.
yeah. At least we don't get another siege weapon. The only other thing I'll say is the good that came out of the ballista is that we get the legendary Max Geiger line.
Go! Yeah! That guy!
Where he yells, "Yeah, fuck that guy!"
Yeah, probably my favorite line in the entire series is, he is just. Well, I mean, we'll get to it, but may as well get into the test.
He's ecstatic because they miss a bunch and then they finally hit. And the last thing I'll say about the ballista is that probably the most absurd weapon matchup. I think my current champion on that was RPG versus flamethrower, but I think ballista versus axe takes the cake. How the heck do you determine what has an advantage? What is better between a ballista and an axe?
Oh, don't worry, they do.
Right.
They do.
They do, and they get it wrong. If it is an army situation, if you're besieging a city, a ballista provides an advantage that a simple axe could never do. But this is one-on-one. This is a duel in an arena. Alexander the Great is hindered by the ballista. He'd do better if he just didn't bother with it at all.
yeah.
How much did it weigh, too?
That's a stat that not the fucking magazine size.
Yeah,
that
it's
thing's
how
probably
much
be
it
like
weighs.
180 pounds at least.
Yeah,
And reload speed.
Reload speed,
too,
yeah.
would be great. But
not the ammo.
yeah, it weighed enough.
One
It weighed
knife.
enough that when armies marched with this, guys didn't like push it around. It's mounted on wheels and it had to be carted around by horse.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's not something. If Alexander the Great, man who never lost a battle, one of the world's most legendary military tacticians, he sees 3 Huns over on like 100 yards away. Get the ballista ready.
Yeah. So going on to the test. So they start out with, I guess you'd call it like a single like poster target. It's like a picture of like a Hun riding a horseback. And they they edited it, of course, to give the impression that this is the first time they're firing the ballista and that it's a hit. And then Max flips his shit. But yeah, so like I bring this up on an episode in the future that we've already recorded. But anytime they fire a long range weapon, pause it after the first shot, and you will always see a bunch of arrows are surrounding it of all their fucking misses. So this is no exception. And then they move on from that test to another target test of multiple dummies crowded together. I don't know what they're made of. I put down concrete, but I think they're like stone.
They're like Dick's Sporting Goods targets.
Yeah, but they're not like the regular, like, I don't know what you call it, but like
Foam.
Yeah, they're not like foam. They're like hard or something.
I don't think they're like stone, but they're definitely a harder material than skin. Because they even make mention, I guess off screen, the Alexander guys predicted that a ballista bolt might be able to go through more than one person.
Well, that was the whole point of that test. That's why they lumped them all together.
Yeah, and Sean Pennington's like, well, we see here that it can't, but that like plastic mannequin is not. That's going to be tougher than human skin. Like I guarantee a ballista bolt could go through 2 people.
Well, you know what would have been
It
perfect.
just looks like a big fail, kind of, as
Yeah.
like a test.
Yeah.
What would have been a perfect for the ballista is the ballistic gel, but I guarantee it was too expensive to get that many ballistic gels in a thing. And like, no joke, like you would, for a projectile like that, I think it would be helpful to see, okay, it's going in like this, but that's too expensive. So they get these rock people.
Should have done a pig.
Yeah.
Shoot it at a pig.
Yeah, and assuming that, because we'll find out when we go down to the aftermath. If this is one-on-one, like it may be, like that is a completely useless test, just wasting everybody's time because it's a one-on-one. So,
Right. It doesn't matter if it can clear more than one guy. Even if it's 3-on-3, it doesn't matter. Like, are Attila's guys lined up? All right, guys, advance in a row.
Yeah. So, Sean Pennington argues that the ballista is too slow, which is kind of an indefensible criticism. And Kendall responds,
What it's built to do, it does better than anything else. It's phenomenal.
which, like, who the hell cares?
Yeah.
Like,
This is a duel. It's not an army on army, which I will get to later in this episode when I talk about all of my gripes.
I want to go ahead and ask him. That was a follow-up question. That sentence, me theoretically being there. Well, what's it meant to do?
yeah.
Siege? Yeah, right.
A castle or
Yeah,
something, or like a
siege, yep.
fort?
And they bring that up on the Rashput Roman Centurion. I think the same sort of point where, like, what the one guy's like, well, it's what it's designed to do. It does awesome.
Yeah, this is mechanized warfare.
And it's like, who the fuck cares? Like, why do multiple people have the same defense?
Yep.
So, and they're both like Roman white adjacent.
Yeah,
people.
right,
The
exactly.
Stupid defense. So,
We're smarter than the barbarian that we're fighting. You know?
yeah. Yeah. So moving on to the Cynthian axe. So again, we're comparing a ballista to an axe.
Makes sense.
It has a range of 5 feet, but is 2.5 inches long and 2.5 pounds. So I'm trying to think: is it like a person's arm?
Yeah,
is 2
your
feet to
arm
reach?
is 2.5 feet. Obviously.
It's like, I mean, I got some long arms, but I don't think this is 2.5 feet. Maybe like an orangutan, or
a 4'11" guy.
or is he throwing it?
Yeah,
Like
right.
I don't get it.
That's the only issue with this test.
Also, I like that Cynthian axe clocks in at 69 miles per hour.
Nice.
And it literally, I think Sean Pennington literally goes, nice. But I don't think he does it in like a self-aware way. I was like,
what's its magazine size?
I was pointing at the camera, I was pointing at the TV though, like Leo, and I was like, 69, he said it. He said it.
Yeah. And so Sean just goes to town on this ballistic gel.
3, 2, 1, go!
There's only so many ways that we can describe how a ballistic gel is getting like hacked up. And I don't know if we've ever mentioned this. This is probably my least favorite type of demonstration because it gives us no information. Like, if you gave me 8 hours and a butter knife, I could fuck up a ballistic gel to where it was unrecognizable.
Yeah.
So to just be like, I mean, I know they do it for the show and for like the commercials, but like in the pursuit of science, which is what Deadliest Warrior is all about, what information does just giving this guy unlimited time to just hack a ballistic gel give you? You can't analyze the cuts.
It's almost like that could just be B-roll that they filmed and then don't have to show that test in like the live. Like, so you can have your cool shots in between historical readings where like a guy is hitting a ballistic gel and the head is just exploding, you know?
If you wanted to get scientific with it, there's so much more interesting stuff that you could like calculate about these weapons.
It's an axe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
And again, it's tough to really elaborate on that.
don't forget though, they tested against the helmet.
Yeah, so we're getting to that. After that first test, Sean takes the dummy's head like he's Macbeth, and he says,
You know, there's some stories I heard here about Alexander being a god, and I think I just proved immortal.
and it's like
I hit a dummy with a fake axe.
like the goth kid behind the bowling alley telling you some stupid shit. So that was annoying. So Kendall brings up a good point, and he asks to test the axe with Alexander's iron helmet. So Sean fails to damage the ballistic gel, even though one of his swings is like a weird swipe.
It's like sideways.
Yeah, with the blunt end of the axe, and it's like, and he's like, I'm surprised I didn't do any damage with that. I'm like, what did you think was going to happen? So
He's like, even with that helmet, get ready for a skull fracture or something.
but then look where the axe goes next, right here.
Then look where it goes next.
He takes like 2 swings and they're both just awful swings. That
He looks like he's swinging a baseball bat at that thing.
Yeah. So they give the edge to the ballista. I don't think they should have given the edge to either of these weapons. Like, not even tied them, but just say neither of them gets the edge.
Hey, to be fair to Sean, he's only a spear and dagger expert, not an axe expert.
Not yeah.
Yes.
Well, here we have a side note from Shino again that Attila the Hun is not recorded having access to the Cynthian axe, so we have to look into this also. Well, red flag straight off the bat is Deadliest Warrior Wiki is the first search result for Cynthian axe.
Let me guess.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to even ask you
A
about it.
Scythian axe is just an axe used by Scythians, probably.
It's sort of. So there's a weapon called a Sagaris, which was a kind of battle axe or warhammer. Were no real blueprints to it. That was just a name for a battle axe or warhammer that was used in Eurasian territories, and examples have been collected from Eurasian archaeological excavations. An example they uncovered was a long-shafted weapon with a metal head with either a sharp axe-like or blunt hammer-like edge on one side and a sharp ice pick on the other. It may have been the Sagaris that led medieval and Renaissance authors to attribute the invention of the battle axe weapon. And there was some Scythian women seen hunting and Scythian warriors riding with them that created this legend about a Scythian axe. So I don't even think this is necessarily a real weapon. It was more a weapon of like folklore where it was just kind of a basic axe, and they saw these like...
But dude, this is Attila the Hun's special weapon.
Yeah.
This was important to him. He carried that axe he took a shit and he had that axe with him. He never let it out of his sight.
Well, there seems to be no real existence or definition of this axe, and the name seems to come from a legend. There's tons of people claiming, this is my favorite part, there's tons of people claiming to sell very rare original Scythian axes on eBay, but they're just like old rusty axe heads from Home Depot, and they're selling them for like $40. It's like rare from excavation site, and it's just like a shitty Home Depot axe.
It's the dude version of selling your bath water. Just like...
So I don't think this weapon's really real. It's that name.
It's an axe.
Yeah, that name is just like a made up name, kind of. So
So
just an axe. Yeah.
thankfully, that's a made up weapon, but thankfully we got the Sword of Mars coming up.
Oh, 100%
which is
real.
made
I actually did research. Stick around and find out.
from a meteorite.
Right.
So, yeah. Sorry, I forgot to ask you about the axe, but they gave the edge to the ballista. Who fucking cares?
They give the edge to a giant stationary siege weapon.
Yeah.
Because
They're like-
the axe didn't pierce a helmet.
Because it didn't pierce... I like the way you put that. Yeah. Because it didn't pierce a helmet. If you'll indulge me...
What if you use the axe to disassemble the ballista?
If you'll indulge me, my friends, I would like to talk about Alexander the Great's armor. So, because it's never brought up again from this point, so I may as well bring it up right now. The real Shino sent us some notes about the armor. He included that in his notes. He brought up that Alexander did not wear a bronze cuirass, as depicted in this episode, but rather an armor known as linothorax, if I'm pronouncing that right. Now, I thought that was going to be some crazy bit of information, but you know what? It only takes one Google search. There is no resource you will ever find that says Alexander the Great wore bronze cuirass. Every resource, and
Even the Deadliest Warrior wiki.
that's the only one. I found in my first Google search, I find an NBC News article saying the armor of Alexander the Great. We'll put it in the description. I just sent Craig a bunch of links that I used, but linothorax. So linothorax was essentially a form of armor made of a specially woven linen with bronze scales.
Oh, my linothorax. It hurts.
Google a picture of Alexander the Great. Every painting he's in, he's got like the white like linothorax armor. It's in every painting of him, and it's comparable to modern Kevlar, except it's bronze scales. And not much of it has survived from ancient times because it's very perishable, unlike solid metal. There's a famous painting where Alexander's wearing it. Historians have written books using this armor description, and there's even an historical account of Alexander having his men burn like their old armor when they get some new ones, and that only makes sense if it's like the linen armor. It doesn't make sense if they're burning. Throw that bronze in there.
It's still there, Captain.
So check out the NBC News article that will be linked down below. It
Was
talks
that
a lot
current
about it.
events?
No. And then Alexander most likely wore I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but Phrygian helmet, also known as a Thracian helmet. Shino points this out in his notes, and he says Shino pointed out that this is like a souped up one that's most likely inspired by the Alexander movie, which it is the same helmet used in the Oliver Stone film. But it's close enough to the real thing. My whole point being, I don't know if you researched Attila's armor at all.
It's not as interesting, but yeah, Shino has a couple notes.
If he's wearing leather, Alexander's bronze armor is far superior in protecting you, and they never bring it up again. Like, his armor advantage is never tested against any of the crucial weapons.
We'll get to that in the aftermath. Someone brings that up.
Someone does bring that up? Okay.
Lucas, my joke about Alexander's armor was going to be, see that new video that Lena Thorax put on her OnlyFans?
That was better than mine.
So
yeah, Shino brings up that besides the leather Lamelaire, whatever it is.
It's fun to say. You know.
Attila commonly wore scale-based armor as well. Then he disliked chainmail. Chainmail was better armor for the time, but he disliked chainmail. That was what Shino said. I couldn't find the definitive answer on the chainmail, but I did learn that some of his men did wear it.
So they might have had similar armors in real life available to them, like scaled armors.
Yeah,
like
the scaled armor actually has a weakness to an up thrust because the scales all go down, and the Huns, as you know, were commonly on horseback.
Yeah.
So I see that as like an inferior armor almost, because you could, if it's weak to the up thrust, where people are like,
yeah, well, even if we're going by what the show has, which is a bronze cuirass and bronze helmet versus, and we see Alexander in the reenactments and stuff has like arms, greaves. Attila is wearing nothing but like a leather vest. And if that's going into the sim, I feel like that has to account for something. Like, he's got such an armor advantage, and that means so much in season 1 and X. It means so much in season 1, but already we're seeing in season 2, like, they hardly ever cover armor unless they're using it to sort of spin a narrative.
Drive a narrative.
Yeah, like, well, we got to give the ballista the edge somehow, even though it's obviously useless to the even the untrained eye that, like, this isn't going to matter in a one-on-one fight. So let's just bring his helmet in and test that. It's like, I just found it interesting.
Well, why not have like a horse or do a moving target with the ballista then?
Right. Yeah. The ballista's useless. I
want to see that 5-hour test.
3-on-3. Yeah.
So, we sort of cover their armor just right now, but Sean says that Attila viewed armor as almost like a hindrance.
I mean, he wore,
Attila wrote that in his notes. He was like, I don't wear armor, it's a hindrance. And someone, this archaeologist found it years later. They're like,
we gotta put this in the sim.
And then the Roman guy Jordan wrote it in. So
yeah. So
Attila's notes, Taylor's version. Sorry.
Shout out. So they talk about Alexander's fighting style called pancration. Rashad Evans shows up. Jeff says he's a big fan. He's like, big fan. It's so funny.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
You can tell he's like as starstruck as like a regular person would be about it.
To be fair, if I saw Jeff in real life, I would go up and say, big fan.
Yeah, big fan.
Big fan. Walk away. Do you want an autograph? No.
I would fucking take a Jeff.
I would, but it would be funny. He'd be like, "You want an autograph?" You'd be like, "No,
I'd be like, Jeff, punch me. I'm gonna do the
yeah.
So Rashad is apparently an expert in Alexander the Great's fighting style, and
it's made up.
I thought when I was a kid, I thought that was real. Like I thought that Rashad Evans studied Alexander the Great and was like, I want to be a UFC fighter. I think that's what I honestly thought as a kid. Do you want to talk real quick before we get into the actual test?
I do.
Rashad Evans?
I have a couple fascinating things, and I actually got sources that will be in the description for both of these articles. I normally don't care about sources, but I thought these were really interesting, and I cribbed almost everything from them, so I had to give credit. They bring on Rashad Evans to demonstrate some MMA moves that he practices, as well as some no rules versions of these moves. He elbows a ballistic gel throw and knees it in the skull. We see how relatively weak these ballistic gels are as limbs fall off. You can see
like when the
hand falls off on one of them.
Well, also too,
Same
like,
density as human skin.
Yeah, it suggests like I definitely would not want to take a knee of his to the head, but the skull just completely shatters in the ballistic gel. And Dorian says like, "Do you hit with that knee, you're dead."
Yeah,
anyone who cares, a knee to the head is an automatic disqualification in the UFC.
They mention that.
Do they?
Yeah, they mention on the show that that's illegal in the ring nowadays. But
because he would kill someone.
Yeah.
So in my research,
and your arm would fall.
Could you imagine? Your hand will just pop off like a Lego, like a Lego.
Then the MMA doctor would have to come in
and Dr. Dorian's gonna be like, if we get him to a hospital, he'll live.
Oh, he's got gastrophetes.
He's got gastrophetes in his pancreation, in his lenothorax.
Lenothorax is like that's the ring card.
She's my favorite ring girl.
So, pancration is a form of martial arts that was invented in ancient Greece, and it was actually made an Olympic game in ancient times. Alexander the Great did indeed practice pancration and actually insisted on his phalanx troops being trained in it. So it's just like an early form of martial arts. The claim that modern MMA is similar to pancration is actually not without merit. There is a Bleacher Report article, if you want to read it, it'll be in the description, that actually talks about MMA being the modern successor to pancration. Now, just use your heads, people. It's been thousands of years. Obviously, Rashad Evans is not watching tape on Alexander the Great and being like, I'm going to try that in the next fight. It's just referring to like Western mixed martial arts styles. So there's a lot of things. There's a lot of different ancient martial arts that eventually leads into what you see in the modern day. So
now, what Rashad Evans is billed as being like professionally is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah, which yeah,
a little bit.
I'm
a different
sure,
spot on the globe.
But what does MMA stand for? Mixed martial arts. It's a bunch of different fighting forms. You have people that study Sambo or they specialize in boxing or whatever. But I'm sure they do study they're not studying old pancration moves. It's just saying like this is eventually leads into modern like fighting tactics, you know, and they just wanted to get Rashad Evans on the show.
Yeah. Someone had the hookup, someone like knew someone, and that was like his community service was coming on the show.
The last thing I wanted to mention is that they have Rashad tested out and Jeff's like, man, Alexander's got a big advantage when it comes to hand. Number one, is that even a thing in the sim when they all have weapons for close range? Number two, Rashad Evans is built like a freaking tank. Alexander the Great, we're looking at like, even on the show,
3 foot tall.
Even on the show, which is, exaggerated, he's like 5'7". It's like, he's not going to be hitting with the force that like Rashad Evans is.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this. Even though this is clearly just an attempt to cross promote all of Spike's like UFC stuff, I think there should be more of this stuff on the show.
Yes.
So I get into the soapbox a little bit with Green Beret versus Spetsnaz, but instead of having like on that episode, for example, a fucking like ballistic knife and e-tool, like if you have like a Green Beret and a Spetsnaz and they're like this close where they can't even aim their gun, I'd be curious to see how these two fighting styles interact with each other. I understand that'd be way tougher to represent, and you'd have to have like a sparring match. But
I think that's what it would just boil down to. A sparring match would be like fun to watch.
Yeah, and it's a shame that like they bring it on multiple episodes on this show. All 3 seasons, they test different styles of like hand-to-hand combat, but it all sort of falls flat because you think to yourself, if all these kills are in a video game with weapons, where is the hand-to-hand coming into play? There are no kills in this sim, if the sim's real, you know. There's no kills where Alexander, choked out Attila the Hun or
bare hands kills.
Yeah.
Elbowed him in the throat and Attila the Hun's hand popped off.
It would be a really interesting aspect because pretty much every military throughout history, even like most modern militaries, have some form of hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah.
Even when I was in the Marine Corps, they have what's called McMAP, the Marine Corps Martial Arts Program. When I was a gray belt in, you're required to at least have the first level of training. And then usually if you want promoted, you have to have at least the second level. And like an actual recognized martial arts, and it's everyone in like the United States Marine Corps has to take this. It's very common, and so like it would be interesting because all throughout history you hear about like the Spartans had like this, the Romans had this. It would be interesting to have that as like its own category.
Yeah, and to me that is more interesting than, like you said, Craig, when they force on a random weapon like
the lasso. Get rid of the lasso and the ballista.
Yeah.
And then show us a hand-to-hand like contest.
Yeah.
Someone gets Rashad Evans.
Yeah. Rashad Evans has to fight
Sean Pennington.
Can I get a new intro for the show? I want to be billed as the McMap gray belt and trauma expert because I work at a hospital.
Yeah. Can I be billed as an MMA watcher?
Yeah.
Could you see? I'm visualizing like Sean Pennington. They still give him the axe against Rashad Evans.
Would not matter.
He takes it. Like,
Yeah.
The real axe they use in this show, I looked it up. You can bid on it, and it's in a prop museum.
Really?
The actual axe from Deadliest Warrior.
Dude, what was it up to?
I don't know. I think it was up like you could bid on it before. It might just be in like a prop museum in Hollywood.
We got room next to the fake katanas and the green beret up there. So
Could you see just like we open like the only Deadliest War Museum in the country?
There's just one thing in it.
We're obsessed with
the axe, and it just says not a real weapon.
we find the ballista from the show, like it's in some guy's, like it's a rundown trailer park, and like he's got a tarp over, and he's like, yeah, there she is. It's like, I'll take it. Gonna strap it to the back of my trailer and wheel the ballista home.
American Pickers, but for
Exactly. Deadliest Warrior.
So
what weapon are we even on now?
yeah. So moving on to long range. We were on the hand-to-hand weapon. Long range, we start with the hunted composite bow. So that's 4 feet, wooden bone bow with iron tipped arrows. I mean, I imagine it's subjective, but I'd be curious to see the range. Lucas has
it pulled up? What's the bid at?
It might just be a museum, but it's the world's largest museum for movie props and costumes. Yourprops.com.
Yeah, they got an advertisement for the Punisher show. Dude, I saw this dude. He had a Punisher sticker on his car. It was awesome.
That's a cool guy.
Yeah, except it had like a bunch of blue on it. That wasn't in the comic. So I don't know what that was about. But.
All right, the hunted composite bow. Let's get back.
I'll say this. I wish they would show the effective range, because like obviously that's super important.
Yeah.
It's long range.
Yeah, and it's iron tipped arrows, which is really fucking relevant. I mean, I understand if you want to get into the nitty gritty. Once you have analyzed, like, well, what are the arrow tips made of? You've gone too far into Deadliest Warrior Sim, and you're missing the point.
Yeah,
like it cannot be analyzed that deep. But what can be is like, what range is this? You know what I mean? So that I think is a little disappointing. Sean says that horse archers were a big part of Attila's arsenal, and this is where I think you get into like the Genghis Khan comparisons. I don't think Milan honestly had this in mind, but I thought it was interesting compared to the Mongols, who Genghis Khan used horse archers extensively, and that was part of what helped him in his conquest. Then you have Attila the Hun with something very similar. Sean says that a bow was as important to the Hun as their right arm, which, I mean, it's probably true.
Sure. I think it was technically like their main weapon that they used. They were very similar tactic of where they would come in on the horses.
Not their
fire a bunch
special
of
weapon,
arrows.
though. That's the Scythian.
Yeah.
So
Alexander carried the ballista everywhere he went. That's why he was so strong.
Yeah. So there's a shot of Sean throwing targets for Robert to shoot with a bow. Sean has just like no expression. He's literally like, and of course, because it's Deadliest Warrior, there's no complete shot of him firing the bow and hitting the target.
Yeah.
To be fair, Robert is legit, but if he wasn't, this would be the perfect thing of like, well,
he definitely missed some in these tests, and like they edited it out, because like the first shot they show landing in the moving target thing, it's either Jeff or Max is like, okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Like he finally hit one. He does end up hitting it a bunch, but it just goes to show you like the extensive editing they have to do.
Yeah. So before they get into the test of either of these weapons, because they're tested like simultaneously, we get the gastrophetes. So stats. Wait, did I write? This isn't a bit. 48 feet.
So it's range 48 feet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, what the fuck? Like, why wouldn't they put that for the bow?
Yeah.
So it's 10 pounds, wooden metal bow, and an iron bolt. They don't get very descriptive with these stats, but
No, the descriptions are pretty awful.
you have to
this whole
figure it out,
episode.
like do the math
Yeah.
of what are they fucking talking about. So, do they really call it the belly bow?
Yes, they do. The Gastrophetes belly bow.
I thought that belly bow was like this ancient word, like BELLIBEAU.
The belly bow is a Lord of the Rings character.
Yeah.
We have to go visit Belly Bow.
And then I was like, oh, a bow, that's on, you fire in your belly.
Yeah.
So yeah, what did you learn about the Gastrophetes?
Okay, Robert displays some pretty solid shooting, and then they bring up a guy who is not an expert at the belly bow to test the Gastrophetes. And it's obvious that Peter, I felt so bad for him watching this because you can tell he's like seriously trying his best to make this thing work. But it's just as if like he probably he heard about the Gastrophetes for the first time that morning. They were like, so you're going to be shooting this later.
On my belly?
Yeah, all day he was probably like, what the fuck am I going to do with this? And so obviously it doesn't look impressive. It's a long, slow reload speed. And this is again, a Gastrophetes is, they sort of try to make it seem like a crossbow in this episode. And so it's like a crossbow going up against a Hun bow. The problem is that the Gastrophetes at the time that it existed was not viewed as a bow. It wasn't viewed as something you would give an archer and deploy into the field. The Gastrophetes was viewed almost like a small kind of ballista. Like it's an artillery piece. So yes, Alexander the Great gets 2 ballistas in this episode. 2 different artillery pieces for a 3-on-3 fight. Again, it's an absurd weapon to have in a 1-on-1 or a 3-on-3 fight. Alexander the Great did have Macedonian archers. He had javelin throwers. These would be more acceptable things to go up against a Hun bow, I'd say. But they're probably not as interesting or as exciting as the Gastrophetes, or like, oh, check this thing out.
We need a different weapon.
Yeah, we need a different weapon. And so you end up seeing this. And of course, it's another kneecap in Team Alexander. Like, these are now 2 weapons in a row that are useless, but at least he can punch harder than Attila the Hun, I guess. He can out grapple him. Listen, the Huns were probably going to get the edge on this no matter what, but like, it's just sad. It's just sad. These are pieces of mechanized warfare that Alexander used very proficiently in army-on-army conflicts, and they provide you with a big advantage because something like a Gastrophetes can fire a bolt like this freaking big.
Yeah, when you have like thousands of these arrows coming in like a big volley, but if you're just one guy in a field by yourself, you look pretty stupid.
You're fumbling around with this thing. It's a hindrance. It's not like a crossbow where you can pull it back and load it, and it's an effective 1-on-1 weapon. Gastrophete, you're spinning around like, where do I get it?
It's probably not even very accurate if you're firing. It's probably just meant to put bolts down range.
Yeah, even if you're trained in it, it's probably not very accurate, and Peter's not trained in it. So I felt so bad for him when he's testing this because he's trying his best and he just is like no chance from the start. So
right.
Yeah.
Lucas, I forgot about you again. Did you find anything on the Hunnic bow? To me, it just seemed like this is probably just like a bow.
Yeah, there's like kind of information on it. It's consisted of combination materials, horn on the inside, on the belly of the bow, sino on the back, wood core, pretty basic bow. Materials are held together with fish bladder or hide glue. I don't know how the fish bladder works there. I was curious about that.
I'm thinking about the first Hun that's like, it was like, why the fuck did you take that bladder from that fish and rub it all over your bow?
I know it seems weird, but check it out.
Yeah.
So examples at least have been found in tubes and graves attributed to the Huns, which attributed to the Huns' importance of these weapons, that they were essentially buried with them. Composite bows were very common in that area of the world across Asia and Europe during that time period. The main advantage of composite bows is they had a smaller size with high power, making them more convenient for horseback. It's like intention is off horseback. Almost all composite bows are also recurve bows, as the shape curves away from the archer. And some disadvantages are constructing these bows, as they mentioned on the show, requires much more time and a greater variety of materials. And many were advised to actually keep their bows inside of leather to keep them dry, as their performance deteriorated in humid and rainy regions. But they were a very effective, small, powerful bow.
That was the same thing with the Mongolian bow.
Yeah.
Is they talk about the rain and how they had to keep it protected.
I think the
Which,
bows
you know,
themselves are very similar.
The Mongolian bow, not that we've already pre-recorded that episode. That was,
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about.
yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, Craig. That's not till the penultimate episode.
Well, this is also more evidence that Attila the Hun and Genghis Khan are the same person. So just keep that in mind.
Yep. If your teacher tells you otherwise,
Just watch the movie Mulan.
yeah, exactly.
You'll know what we're talking about.
Just be like, yo, I may not get good grades, but I got street smart.
Ask Alexa.
Yeah. So the test, they start with moving with targets. Robert's on horseback and Peter's on foot. Jeff says that what is this episode or not this episode, but this I think it's this test where it is this where Jeff says that okay, you have the wood targets and there's obviously a crosshair on it, and if you get it in the bullseye, it's a kill. So Robert performs well. He may have missed some in the beginning, but it's clear he's adept at that. I mean, he runs a horse archery Hunnick thing in Canada, like we talked about. So I imagine he's legit. And then he obviously, on his hits, he doesn't all get him in the bullseye. But Dorian still says that all of his arrows were kill shots, despite Jeff specifically saying that only the bullseye hits were.
You've got 2 moving targets. You'll have a total of 10 arrows. And if you hit a bullseye, that'll be considered a kill shot.
Dead center in the chest. These are all coming at the neck. All these are pretty much kills. We're seeing it definitely penetrate at least 4 or 5 inches.
So, are these people's heads, or what? He's like, yeah, these are all be kills.
How do you determine if a piece of wood that is nothing even similar to a human body, no shape, anything? Oh, that one's a kill right there. That one's debatable. That might be up, in the flesh territory.
He says it so confidently. He's like, yeah, that would be a kill.
Also,
why?
Generally, this is a serious question. Generally interested to know the answer. How does a Hunnick bow firing an iron tip arrow do against bronze armor? Would it punch through it? Would it not be as effective?
Well, according to the sim, it dings off.
I'd just like to know because we don't test it. Season 1, doing this show has allowed me to see season 1. Sometimes things seem like they're slapped together at the last minute, but it seems so much more genuine than a lot of season 2, which just feels even more scripted. Like it feels more scripted, and I think it's because they know more of what they're doing, and they're like, we're just not going to bring that armor up because it just creates more tests. And
Season
I don't want to
1,
do it.
they actually did the test where the arrow dinged off the armor, and they're like, okay, we just won't include that footage and don't bring it up. Season 2, they didn't even do the test. They're just like, ignore the armor.
They're like,
about it.
don't worry about it. We don't want to have to do 2 tests.
I got dinner at 6.
Yeah, but it's an important question. Like, can Attila the Hun kill Alexander the Great if he hits him in the biggest part of the body, your chest and stomach? Or is he going to have to get especially a guy riding on horseback, is he going to have to hit him in the face area? Doesn't matter because the gastrophetes is pretty useless against the Huns, in a 3-on-3. But it's an interesting question, and I'd like to see the show answer it, but they don't.
I was at my MMA doctor the other day, and he said I have gastrophetes.
Okay.
Just take some Tums. You'll be good. I don't know, Craig. Are you moving on to the next weapons? Or
I was going to talk about Peter's test where
go ahead.
He kind of makes this weird coming face every time he shoots the bow where he goes. And I don't think it's the recoil. It's just this weird
I think
it might be him being too scared firing something he's never fired before, waiting for something to go wrong.
It's anxiety. It's there's a term in basketball and in shooting and in probably a lot of other things, anything involving like projectiles, called follow through, where if you shoot a basketball and like look away too quick because you get nervous to see like, did it go in? You will throw your shot off because your body is like reacting. And I feel like that's what he's doing, is anticipating his shot because he's like nervous about hitting this target because he's never fired it and he's wants his team to win and he doesn't want to let them down. So every shot he's like, you know,
that's an interesting theory. And also, he probably doesn't want to fucking reload it again because if you watch, he missed a few times, and he's a very fit guy. He's like super winded because he has to like
right, constantly
He's like reloading the third thing, and he's like, there's like 2 fingers missing.
He's like, Dad, can we go home? And Jeff's like, no, you got to hit it again.
Yeah. So they give the edge to Attila. I mean, they weren't going to let Alexander have that range.
No.
So
I mean, I think I would much rather have a bow and arrow than that thing.
Again, 1-on-1, 3-on-3. The bow and arrow is superior to the Gastrophetes or the ballista. Like,
yeah, even if you had to hit like this was your target, you could still probably get like 10
I'd rather
arrows
at least
off.
just be able to rain arrows on the guy rather than like, hold up. You know? The only thing I'll add is in between tests here, they have Sean Pennington, and he says Alexander should have stayed home and tried on one of his, quote, frilly little skirts. And this is just, I need to make this a segment, Homophobic Watch, with this show. I forgot how many homophobic comments are made, like, on this show. And I wrote on here, I wonder, like, is it just that producers feed these lines to guys, and so that's why they're all very similar? Or is it men are really so limited in their shit-talking vocabulary that the most common insults to your opponent are that he's gay or he has a small dick? Because those two things get repeated so many times in this show, and now that I'm paying attention to it, it drives me crazy. Like, he's like, in his frilly little skirt, and I'm like, here we fucking go. Like the Huns never did anything gay.
Well, so legit question, not trying to be funny. Was Alexander the Great gay?
He was bisexual, but it was, keep in mind, it was a lot more acceptable in ancient Greece to, I mean, it's well documented that homosexuality and like bisexuality were a lot more common practice in ancient Greece than they are sort of in, because this was a pre like Christian society, you know, but once Christianity came around in Europe, that's when it became extremely taboo and sinful to be gay. I'm really oversimplifying a continent's history here, but you get what I mean. And that carried through into America, in the Americas, with like the Puritans and all that. So yeah, he definitely messed around with some boys, but
because that changed the context. If there was no evidence for him being gay, he just said that, it's like, okay, that's funny.
No,
but like if he's talking about him being gay,
there's evidence, and it's so common in ancient Greece. You know, we joked about it with like the Spartans doing, you know, pedo stuff, and but it, like, being with guys and polyamory, even, like, these are all heathens and pagans people. They didn't care about any of that stuff.
Also, that was just cultural norm for them too.
You only live to be like 28, so you're like,
just fuck everything.
Yeah, fuck it. I'm gonna spread where I can.
Yeah. So anything else you want to say about Homophobia Watch?
I didn't notice any others. I did notice there's a lot of homoerotic comments in this episode.
I planned on, which we'll get to the Z-Ston. There's an entire...
Yeah. I'm glad you feel the same way, Craig, because I was like, am I just being immature? But I'm picking up, like, I feel like a lot of this stuff is scripted to be purposely, like, there was lines that constantly just had me going, like, one eyebrow at the TV, like,
yeah, to the point where it's not beyond just us being like, oh, he said like 6 inches. It's like a lot of stuff to the point where I think it's deliberate. So I'm going to introduce the Z-Ston real quick, and then so it's 12 feet long. Wait, long?
Yeah, it's 12 feet long.
Christ,
yeah, it's a big.
When you watch like Rashad hold it, dude, it's like ridiculous.
It's a war lance.
That's crazy. Peter describes the Z-Ston, and I'm going to show you the clip. I'm actually going to edit together, along with the Z-Ston, every single like homoerotic reference that I can find in this episode.
That'll actually be pretty funny.
Yeah.
Maybe we won't sound so immature. You guys can see for yourselves, see the evidence.
Do you have gastrophetes? Talk to your doctor about Z-Ston. All right, I'm done with that joke.
So the supercut's coming now.
It was a devastating lance, about 12 feet long, tremendous spear tip. So imagine the weight of this massive Z-Ston combined with the force of the rider and the speed of the horse, all that focused on this tip.
I just get the horse going, he knows what to do.
And we got over 200 pounds of load.
Now notice it has 2 different tips. Now, why is that?
The butt spike, mainly for counterbalance. And it's got a thick spot right here.
And when you go beyond 3 inches, you're hitting vital organs. So that's what counts.
All right, welcome back. That was fun, wasn't it?
That was fun.
So with the where the hell am I?
You were going to talk about the Z-Ston shaft.
Yeah. And the butt
the butt spike.
the butt spike.
It's for counterbalance.
That's the butt spike. Go ahead and touch it.
Okay. So the test. Rashad comes back because I guess they still had him for another like 30 minutes to stab the pig for some reason. It's him. Is this like Attila the Hun versus Alexander the Great or Attila the Hun versus Rashad Evans? Like,
I can tell you which one I want it to be.
The results would have been different. I like to think when I was watching this that this was Rashad's payment for being on the show. Like he didn't get any money, but he was like, I'll do like the stupid karate stuff, but like I want to stab a pig with a spear.
Yeah, so the pig's on the wire, right? Not
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
they
like
come-
simulating
like
a charging
throw it.
enemy or something.
yeah, and it goes right through the pig, super easy.
Lucas hates that test so much. Every time the charging pig gets brought up, Lucas is always like says it with the same tone. He's always like, yeah, and it simulates a charging enemy. It's so stupid. And you can tell he just wants to walk off set.
The horse curse, man. Lucas is like, it's supposed to simulate a what? So
I think it comes on again this episode.
yeah. Any other thoughts on the Z-Ston? I guess you have any background on it?
Not really. I mean, it's an accurate weapon. It's a lance, and you know, Mike Dooley's itching at home right now, thinking about how they didn't give the knight a lance. But we do see multiple lances for horseback warriors in season 2. This is the first one, and you get to see just how effective a lance is on horseback. Maybe not as effective as a blunderbuss, but you know, someone on horseback with a lance is a very simple and just devastating weapon because the horse is driving so much momentum behind like the butt spike. And it'll go through armor, it'll kebab people, and
I got a question for you that you may or may not know the answer. Whenever because he does this whole spiel where they're like, yo, you go down, you let it do its work, and then do they let it go?
No.
I was gonna say that's the dumbest, but the guy defends it like, oh yeah, that's what you do. You go down, you let it go.
Yeah, it was that test is just operator error. It's because he's just running up and like plunging it in there.
Yeah, I imagine
you would
it's more
normally
room for like accidents if he holds on to it, like if it come hit the horse or something.
You would normally stab it in and pull it back out and stab it in again. Again, not that we've already recorded a Comanche Mongol episode, but but there may or may not be a test in Comanche where they test a war lance and Joaquin Gonzalez stabs multiple targets with a lance. That's how a Z-Ston would have been used.
Yeah, so it has a bigger magazine size than one.
Yes, yeah, it does have a greater magazine size.
How big is the butt spike on that one?
Massive.
All right, so moving on to the lasso. Lucas, I'm not even going to ask you for the history of the lasso because it's a fucking rope. Do you have the history of the rope?
My favorite weapon in Red Dead Redemption.
And Death Stranding.
Yeah.
Is
very
this a weapon
entertaining.
though? Are you kidding me? A lasso against a fucking spear, against a lance. Shino agrees with me on this one. I'm sure everyone else does.
Stats real quick: 20 feet, 1 pound, and natural fiber. Go ahead.
Natural fiber.
Yeah, rope.
Like most warriors for all of history, the Huns had access to spears and javelins. They were literally at war with the Roman Empire, so I'm sure they had some of their spears and javelins and lances also. This weapon is a complete joke. I'm sure a Hun could be carrying rope for various reasons, but in no universe are they going to use that as a weapon that they charge into battle with.
It's like the producers knew the ballista would perform really bad, and they're like, yeah, but we want it on the show. Let's try to even it up and give the Huns like a bad weapon. Let's give them a rope against a spear.
And the dumbest B-roll footage of maybe this episode is just awful. He rides up, places it like over his neck, and then goes and like the pull, like they say it's 70 pounds of force. I doubt that. It just slightly pulls the dummy off the back of the horse.
It's the lamest test ever.
The test. I'll cover this right now. He puts a lasso around the dummy's neck and pulls him. Yeah. That's the test.
Oh, but there's 70 pounds of force. They test for a hangman's fracture or a crushed windpipe, and then. Just to add stupidity to this test, Armand Dorian. So they get the ropes around his neck and he's getting pulled. Armand Dorian says that you can live getting dragged behind a horse with a crushed windpipe. So it's not a definite kill.
Thank you, Dr.
Yeah, the
Dorian.
guy being drugged behind the horse, do they use it as a weapon? Maybe they did. Gets the guy around his neck, pulls him off the horse. He's being dragged. It's not a definite kill. That guy's still alive. Does it matter? Stupid. Hate it.
Yeah.
Still my favorite weapon in Red Dead 2.
Oh yeah.
You can just it's the most
Hog tying your friend.
hog tying a guy and leaving him in the alligator swamp.
Yeah, the Dorian's like, you can still live with a crushed windpipe. Your body will still find ways to oxygenate. I would think that
Your ear just starts taking in oxygen.
the more damaging part of it would be like falling on your ass or like breaking a bone on the way down, depending how high you are. Like,
yeah,
that's the most dangerous part of the lasso.
I get what he's going for. Like, if someone's getting hung and their windpipe gets crushed, they can still stay alive, like hanging there for a little bit. But in the context of this, where he's getting dragged or drugged behind a horse,
yeah. And I do love the intro for this weapon. You can tell it's a line they gave Sean because Jeff's like, man, that Z-Ston is powerful. You got any counter for this? And Sean goes, well, Attila's counter for this would have been his medium range weapon, the lasso. It's like,
just give him like a javelin or something. I know they don't want to do like lance on lance, spear on spear type thing, but just give him like something better than a lasso.
How about I'll do you one better. Switch the axe and the lasso and have the lasso go up against the ballista, so that can be just this is the dumb test.
I want to see them lasso a bolt. Is it?
Yeah.
All right, but yeah,
yeah, I'm sure they had lances.
Ask me if I agree with the edge.
So what do you think about that? I don't. It is impossible to argue against this.
We haven't even been debating edges on this episode, which is normally like a thumbnail worthy thing, but like the edges are so obvious when you watch this that it's just like whatever.
I'm sure people like carry rope for various things with them, but outside of like Hollywood, does anyone like
what makes
like outside of ranching, like has anyone ever used that to like hog tie the bad guy?
There's an intruder home invasion and you're like this, come here, you motherfucker.
So I was thinking about this. We've argued about here whether the sim is real or not. Not really argued, we just kind of been like, see, it's a really stupid sim if it is real. But I think about this. When they bring on a weapon that is so useless, which happens a lot in this episode, if you were smart, I mean, you and I, Craig, like, we're not Greek warriors or Hun archers, but with common sense even, I know if I had to fight a guy one-on-one, I would not waste a millisecond on the ballista or the gastrophetes. I would have a fucking spear and a sword. And the same thing goes with this lasso. At what point in this battle is Attila the Hun going to put away his bow and decide, well, I could pull out my axe or I could pull out my sword? Nah. This one's for the honor kill, and pull out the lasso.
Play the game.
It's like, does the sim force the warriors to use these? Is that what it's doing? It's forcing you to pull it out at a certain range, because a warrior is better off not knowing it. Like, how much autonomy does a warrior have in the sim? But that starts to lead into other questions. Like,
Right. So I've been quiet for a little
yeah,
bit here,
please.
but I don't know about the Huns, but another steppe tribe known as the Tatars, they use lassos very often on horseback. And it's believed that one of the reasons why the Polish cavalry had these big wings was so that they wouldn't get lassoed. Because
Interesting.
if you got lassoed and you got pulled off your horse, you were basically dead.
Yeah.
Because there's no way you were going to be able to survive against, a whole bunch of other horse archers. They could just run you down and shoot you full of arrows.
Well, there you go, Brendan.
Why did I was saying the whole time, the lasso, very effective weapon, history proven.
Well, very, very interesting that they bring it on and they don't. The show never mentions.
I don't know if
anything
the
like
Huns
that.
use it, but I do know definitely the Tatars used it.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly very interesting. I would have liked to have heard about that on the show at least. What we're presented is so underwhelming. And
But this also was like 1,200 years later.
oh, okay, interesting.
So maybe a bit of a time gap.
Yeah. All right. Well, no more need. Edge Z-Ston.
Yeah, I'd still rather have
Yeah, right.
a 12
That's a good point, Brendan, but I might rather have a Z-Star. So, moving on to short range, start with the Copus.
The Copus.
Says it like that. Stats are 26 inches, which is, I feel like is really long. Well, I don't know, 2 feet ish.
Yeah.
Whatever.
That's about, your arm.
Yeah. that's about the length of the sentient axe. 2.5 pounds, made of iron. They say it's based on the Greek verb to cut. Any interesting facts on the Copus? And what's the idea behind the curve?
Yeah, so the curve is designed as slicing and hacking. The weight is, you have the weight at the top and you have the curve, so you can hack off a man's limbs.
Does it curve to the left or right?
Put that in the montage.
Put that in the montage.
It does translate to cut, and I think we mentioned on the Spartan episode that Spartans also used the Copus because it was same time period like ancient Greece. Not the exact same time period. Get on me. You know what I mean, an ancient Greece time period. And I did find that Alexander the Great and his Macedonian army, most of his hoplites carried a Xiphos that we see, the Spartan short sword, but that Alexander the Great is most often depicted and believed to have carried a Copus on, horseback. And I think about it this way, it's a good cavalry sword. I mean, it's a good sword in general, but it's a good cavalry sword. Swords that were built specifically for horseback are usually curved like sabers. And the Copus is sort of working on the same principle of being a little curved, so when you're coming in, you can hack somebody. It's a good little sword. I thought the test was a little underwhelming. I felt like the little meat necks and the skulls don't stay on their platforms very well, and I really question the reason the edge is given. I guess we can get into that in a little bit. This is the only edge worth debating in this whole thing. I'll also note, never tested against armor. Pretty sure a Copus could go through leather. I don't know if the Mars meteorite could go through bronze. What is the strength of Mars meteorite hit by lightning? So
Yeah. So because these are also tested simultaneously, they move on to the Sword of Mars, which is like a JRPG weapon.
the Sword of Mars.
Yeah. It's 31 inches, 3 pounds, and made of meteorite iron according to the stat screen. Which, again, there's a lot of, stay tuned for the aftermath, because there's a lot of analogs to what we're talking about that are addressed in that. So pretty informative aftermath. But, Lucas, what is meteorite iron?
Well, something that would never be trusted to a noob because it could bring apart the end of the world of Warcraft.
Exactly.
This is from.
Yeah.
So, a legendary blade forged from a meteorite and blessed by the god of war. Sean?
Well, they say Mars. Did the Hungarians even recognize Mars as the god of war?
I had that question too, because Mars is a Roman god. and the Huns fought the Romans, did they believe? They're like, yeah, this is the sword of Mars.
Do you want the real backstory on the sword? I have the real backstory.
Because about to be like, it doesn't exist.
This is where the weapon gets its origin story, and it was written by the Roman historian Jordanes.
Yeah, because it seems like a propaganda thing that, like, yeah, the god of war, our god of war, gave our enemy like this really nasty sword.
Well, here is the legendary sword of the gods. This is its origin story. A shepherd found a heifer in his flock, limping, with no cause of the wound. He followed the trail of blood and found a sword. He dug it out of the ground and took it straight to Attila. He rejoiced at this gift, being ambitious, thought that he had been appointed ruler of the world, and that through the sword of Mars supremacy, all wars were assured to him.
Nice.
That's the backstory on the sword. Now, yeah, I did clarify that it's not Mars the planet either. It is Mars, like the god of war.
Yeah.
And in the 11th century, 500 years after his death, a sword allegedly belonging to him surfaced. And then it passed through a long line of rulers. But there is no evidence that it's actually his sword, but it is on display in the really long word with a K museum. It's like Kunstgeschäftes Museum. Although historians believe it to be Hungarian, but they think it is from the early 10th century, which is, a while after his death. Also, it looks nothing like the one on the show. The one on the show actually, I don't know what that's supposed to be, but the real one is actually closer looking to a kopis. So there's that. So it's almost like, it's not exactly like a kopis. It doesn't have like the same.
So what you're saying is they gave the edge to a random sword that they just made.
I do love the super corny animation of the bolt of lightning hitting the sword and then it glowing like orange.
Yes.
But Sean's demonstration of thrusting this thing.
One of the great capabilities of this weapon is its thrusting. You've got so much weight packed behind such a small point, and that puts a lot of force behind it. Thrust down at the ground for the foot, thrust forward, for the belly, thrust down at the head, you spear somebody's head. It's just got that wonderful kill feature.
It's very much like, piercing buffalo to the face, piercing buffalo to the heart.
What is a kill feature on a sword? You can do this and it's a kill feature.
It's also got multiplayer. Yeah, so I actually don't even have that much written about this test. So they go on horseback and then cuts like side of beef. The kopis does not go very deep. It kind of just like lacerates the beef, whereas Sword of Mars goes right through it. I didn't even write down the edges of Sword of Mars. That's right.
Yeah.
So Kendall does basically the same thing. I mean, I guess what else? It's hard to tell how deep the cuts are, because like of how the writing.
Yeah, it came as a shock to me because it seemed like the swords did the exact same fucking thing.
Yeah, and some of them it seems like the sword like knocks the meat over. It doesn't even like go through.
Yeah,
it.
like the heads and meat. That's why I was saying about the skulls and the meat aren't even like tied onto the stand. So like the sword hits it and it just kind of falls over.
Were they out of like any other analog and they just went down to like the butcher shop? Like, can you have like any scrap meat you can give us? Like it's just
ribs.
chunks of like shit hanging. And then Sean looks like he has never like swung a sword, especially not on horseback before. Like they just ride up and it's the most anticlimactic, like
it's like
looking
Robert swings the sword for the Huns and then Kendall does it for Alexander. Yeah. And
he learned it from Anthony DeLongis.
Yes.
It's Robert for
well, it's interesting because they do that. And it looks like they do the same exact thing. And then Armand Dorian is like, yeah, well, these lacerations on the beef are way deeper for the Sword of Mars, so I'm going to have to get that the edge. And I was just like, what is he talking about? Like, if you get cut with the kopis...
Like a chunk in half. Yeah. And he's like, that guy, he's still alive.
Yeah. I'm like, if you get cut with this kopis, how are you possibly saying that this guy is still alive? Also, I've beat it to death. No armor test. Kopis, I'd like to see how it holds up against leather, and I'd like to see the Sword of Mars go through my thorax, okay?
That sword stand-in that they use for the Sword of Mars not only looks nothing like
generic,
the real, it just looks like shit.
Yeah.
Like it just looks like a shitty sword.
They also don't talk about the design differences. Like that curve is like obviously a big what differentiates this sword from other swords, and they don't talk about a sword on sword clash. It's just like corned beef. Like that doesn't give us any information. So
yeah, it was a weird test. If anything, they should have just been called even based on the evidence we're shown. But they need the edges to be even, and they already gave the edge to the ballista for some reason. So
honestly, I would have liked a test with a gel dummy better, where they just hit it.
Yeah,
and
right.
Like, it would have been better. Like those just chunks of beef are just so dumb.
I know.
Yeah. So Edge, sort of Mars. Does Real Sheen have anything to say about that? I feel like that would piss him off.
He just talked about the fact that like sort of Mars isn't real, and Shino
that'll do it.
Yeah, and Shino,
a shepherd found it in his yard.
Shino echoes a lot of my sentiments about the lack of testing of armor in this episode.
Which again we'll get to in the aftermath. So, we're at the end here, boys. So in conclusion, Lucas, you want to take us away with the fight description?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am what is now being called your sim master for the day. So this time around, they don't do a body count at the bottom, but they are given a small squad of men for some reason because they like to make things up. And it will be run 1,000 times in a simulation built by Slytherin Studios. I mention that because later this season, they start changing the name for some reason. So hit the enter button. We open up as a Roman soldiers wheeling a ballista, the most unwieldy goddamn thing you've ever seen, with Alexander the Great on horseback.
A Roman soldier? You said a Roman
Same
soldier.
thing. They get the point.
One of Alexander the Great's lackeys is like
whatever. One of his lackeys.
He might have been from Rome. You never know.
The Centurions.
Well, I write Rome.
The giant, like bald guy, though.
Alexander the Great is on horseback behind him. Also, shouldn't he be wheeling that on horseback, since these are specifically horseback warriors? They show Attila and his men sitting like 20 feet away, not noting this gigantic behemoth ballista. I'm sorry, it's so stupid. Attila has like a ham sandwich thing and is picking the ham out of the sandwich and eating it.
Well, the opening is so funny. They're all sitting there, and it's originally portrayed
like
that,
a hamburger bun with ham on it.
It's originally portrayed that like the ballista is on the other side of a hill and they can't see it, and like they show like birds flying, and the Huns are like, "Oh, is something over there?" And then after they fire the ballista, they cut, and it is like sitting 50 yards away, broad daylight, while the Huns are like eating their Subway.
The lackey cranks this goddamn thing for 20 minutes, and then Attila looks up, not because this thing is aiming at him, but because the birds start squawking in the background. A giant bolt comes down and pierces one of Attila's men, sending him flying backwards onto a table. Attila finally stands up without reacting to the death at all, and slowly starts walking forward, finally seeing them now that they're 15 feet away. He mounts his horse and pulls out his Hun bow. One of the Romans tries to... I put Romans for some reason. One of the lackeys tries to quickly load his gastrophetes, but he gets shot by one of the Huns in the no reflex kill zone. Attila takes his shot. Instead of aiming at the open spot in the helmet, shoots Alexander dead center in his armored chest. Alexander then rides in with his lance out and stabs one of the Hun soldiers through the chest, leaving it behind. Not the real strategy.
Right.
Oh shit. Attila comes out of nowhere with his lasso of doom, and this fight's pretty much over now. No one can outlive a lasso. Oh no, it backfired, and Alexander the Great caught the lasso, the greatest weapon ever created. Then the most kindergarten game of tug of war ensues. The actor playing Attila just kind of gets off his horse and pretends to fall. More super lame tug of war until Alexander the Great becomes Alexander the Goof, and they both fall over on top of each other. Next up will either be some awful fighting or one of those Hollywood makeout scenes where they both land on top of each other. They both pull out their shields, the episode never addressed once. Alexander with the kopis and Attila with the Scythian axe that probably doesn't exist. Alexander starts beating on Attila's shield until it makes him drop it. Finishing blow. Oh wait, no, Attila dodged it. Then he buries his axe into Alexander's shield, which I guess just makes him discard it because now it's unusable. Now it's the old classic sword versus sword. Now let's remember back to which one got the edge. Attila cuts Alexander's arm, and there we have it, folks. Finishing blow. Oh, wait, no. Alexander dodged it and threw Attila down. So we get some very bad Hollywood fist fighting. Remember, Alexander is trained like a UFC fighter.
They should have got Rashad Evans to play Alexander the Great.
Rashad Evans. Like I'm sure you will have put that thumbnail, that still of him in like the Alexander the Great hat. Oh, he wears Attila's hat at one point, and he's got the axe, and he's like bugging at the camera.
Alexander is trained like a UFC fighter, so this fight is over. Oh, wait, no. Attila kind of just messed up his arm a little bit. Attila starts crawling for his sword. He reaches it. This is going to be game over, boys. Oh, wait, no. Alexander pulls him back, and he drops the sword. He kicks Alexander in the face and runs back for the sword. Attila then stabs him through the neck. Game, set, match. And we get a mighty scream as Attila wins.
I did notice on that kill shot, they cut to like a different shot where it's the effect of it going through the neck. And then when he pulls it out, the sword is clean. There's no blood on it at all in like the next cut.
Continuity error, Deadliest Warrior.
Oh, talk about a continuity error. I also wanted to note this. They each start the fight. Alexander starts with 2 guys. Attila starts with 2 guys. We see both of the Huns die. We only see one of Alexander's guys die. Did you guys notice that? Because the guy shoots the ballista.
He's there to tell the tale.
The guy shoots the guy shoots the ballista and kills one of the Huns. Then the Macedonian is fumbling with his gastrophetes and gets killed. So that's 1 kill, 1 kill. Alexander kills the second Hun with the Ziston. The guy who was using the ballista just disappears. We never see him again.
Off. He was reloading it the whole time.
Yeah.
Well, no, honestly, just one of the worst Sims.
So bad.
Just the whole thing is just like a big goof.
Spirit Halloween costumes, bad facial hair, like
bad acting.
Yeah. Well, other thing too, I forgot to mention this. Did you guys think that not Attila, but Alexander the Great was played by like multiple people?
That's interesting.
Because like you see him
like that.
I think so. Like you could maybe make the argument it's different stages of his life, but it's basically like I think they might have a shot of him as a kid and then like adulthood. Like you're telling me they have like a 20s and like a 30s and a 40s.
In one of the flashback things or like one of the excerpts, they have him as like a younger guy. Yeah, so it's definitely a different actor there.
I don't know. I feel like it's
whatever.
I don't know. Whatever. I just want to shun Deadliest Warrior. So moving on to the stats. So let me scroll down.
Results.
So we got, I guess results. Attila the Hun, Scythian Axe gets 95 kills. The Hunnic Bow, 354, so pretty meaty. 30 kills for the fucking lasso. Sword of Mars gets 117 for a total of 596. Alexander the Ballista gets 7 somehow. The Gastrophetes gets 52 somehow. The Ziston gets 225, and the Copes gets 120 for a total of 404 kills. So Jeff says that he didn't think that Attila had that much skill, which at what point did they test Attila's skill and not just the weapons? I don't know.
I mean, he was still like a warlord and, invaded entire like countries, and I'm sure he had some skill.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then Rashad, as the counterpoint, he says that Alexander is the truth. Okay?
Alexander is the truth.
Yeah. So, well, why don't we save... Obviously, we have probably thoughts on this outcome. Maybe we'll save it for the final thoughts after the aftermath.
I have 2 result-based trivia. These results are actually right in the middle of the kill differentials of Season 2, so I always keep track of that. So if number 1 is the most lopsided and number 13 is the most even matchup, this was number 6. So
cool.
Right in the middle. And I would like to note the Scythian Axe outperforms the Ballista despite the edge. Not surprising to anybody.
They actually do bring it up on the aftermath too.
And the Copus outperforms the Sword of Mars by like 3 kills.
That's like null and void.
Despite
I feel like
despite the edge.
Those kind of equal each other out.
Sure.
I feel like it's close.
Which is why I think they should have even gotten even with those. I would have been fine with that because it's pretty equivalent. So yeah, any other thoughts about the results specifically before we get into the aftermath and then our final thoughts?
About the results, no, I guess I can save everything for the final thought.
Yeah.
Attila would like that.
I have a number of notes on the final thoughts, but I'll wait.
Yeah. So, for the aftermath, Jeff is wearing another different AK-47 shirt from what we see.
That's like is that like a clothing line?
I don't know, but it's a very derivative of the tap out. It's like tap out, but with AK-47. It's weird.
Yeah.
So multiple times he's worn a shirt like that, but God bless him. I guess real quick, I'll talk about. They do mention about how the Scythian Axe didn't get the edge and it got more kills, and Jeff just like, yeah, that happens. So nothing too revelatory there. Peter makes an intelligent point that the critical point of failure was the Copus test and its inability to cut the meat. I don't necessarily agree that's why Alexander lost, but I think I think there's something to be said that was the point that really turned the match up.
No, it wasn't wheeling this 200-pound thing and
the sword test, armor. Let's get an armor test.
Yeah.
Leather versus bronze. Just saying.
So a viewer says that Alexander the Great actually encountered mounted archers and beat them time and time again. So, again, pointing to maybe inconsistencies. And then he later incorporated mounted archers into his army because of their effectiveness. And Sean says a great line in response to him beating these archers. He says, "There's a very fine line between defeat and tactical retreat," which is like an awesome Deadliest Warrior quote. And okay, now this is what I was talking about. So when the viewer brings that up, Jeff says that the difference on Deadliest Warrior is that it's man versus man and not army versus army.
The question is valid. I mean, history shows what happened with an army versus army outcome. But what we did here on the show was a man versus man outcome. And I think that really changes the game, and I think the outcome is valid.
Now, I guess you could maybe argue that he means squad on squad, but to me, he's saying this is like the different Deadliest Warrior is it's one-on-one. And I'll put like the direct quote.
Yeah. It's a duel. It's not a like warfare. It's not a battlefield.
Yeah, but then if that's true, why are you testing with like with the ballista test, multiple people? Why does he say that they're going to do a 3v3?
Yeah. I'll save my thoughts on that comment for my final thoughts because I remembered that comment by Jeff, and I think it's bullshit.
Yeah,
so.
Why was Alexander there with some Romans?
You're right.
I don't know why I put that.
Yeah.
But
there's a lot. I feel like in my uneducated mind, there's
some
a lot
parallels.
Yeah. So
I was probably just thinking that. Yeah.
The Romans stole a bunch of shit from the ancient Greeks.
So we get kind of what we've all been waiting for. A viewer asks why the armor for Alexander was hardly tested. And Jeff says that the tests are based on historical moments or practicality. So basically he says that the reason that the Scythian axe was tested is because I guess there's a story where Alexander got hit in the head by his axe and he says he got his bell rung. So they were trying to mimic that, which sort of points to how you talk about like the reliability test. Cause with the M4, or they are,
where how they
I
test
thought he got hit in the head with a sword and it went through his helmet and he like almost died.
I mean, they say he got his bell rung, so if that's what that means,
I mean, if that's what getting your bell rung is, then
he got hit by an e-tool, and it severed the top of his head from the bottom of his head,
and he had to go to an MMA doctor.
Dr. Dorian stapled him up.
Yeah. And then he also uses the example of the Z-Ston was tested against Mongolian armor because it would be used on horseback. So he's saying that like tests are designed like based on how they would maybe react in the sim. Now, if you'll remember, the question is why the armor wasn't used, and that statement does not answer that at all.
No.
So, and now Kieran actually presses Jeff and asks why the cuirass wasn't tested, which I give him credit. He's like, well, that didn't answer the question. Well, he doesn't say that, but you know. Yeah. And then Sean kind of comes to Jeff's rescue and says that because the bow is so accurate and could hit around the plate armor, the other weapons were not tested against the cuirass. Which also doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't explain why the sword's not tested against it. And
the bow.
And that is a important thing to note, though. is Attila the Hun, is this average Hun archer accurate enough to hit someone in the face? Because we talked about that with Samurai versus Spartan, where it's like, well, yeah, I can hit you in the eyeballs. And it's just thinking about, like, is that really a likely shot that's going to happen on the battlefield? If these guys are going back and forth at each other, this fight is like, if Attila the Hun can get a good enough shot on Alexander or his horse before Alexander can reach him with a spear, like, that's what this episode ended up being.
Yeah, and that's almost why, like, I kind of agree with it in a way. Can I go into, like, results here?
Oh, hold on.
More.
Well, so there's still couple more things in the aftermath. Then we'll get into maybe our final thoughts.
I'll save it for that then.
Okay. The viewer asks why the ballista was even tested on a one-on-one fight. Where would you even get that question? Jeff just goes, how can you not test the ballista?
Which is the appropriate answer, and it shows you the priority on the show.
They just wanted to shoot it.
Yeah, it's just we thought it would be cool.
If someone like called me up and was like, "Hey, I got a ballista. You want to go shoot it?"
Yeah, it would.
Yeah,
they thought it would
cool.
be funner for TV than like another bow.
Yeah. And then Jeff also says that they had to highlight Alexander's engineering feats. Which, why do you have to do that?
Not a one-on-one fight.
That's like some season 3 shit of like his scrappy engineering.
Yeah, right.
Or something. And then second to last thing about this matchup, a viewer asked if meteorite iron was actually used in the sim, and thankfully Jeff says no, which begs the question, why did they say it was meteorite iron? I guess those stats really do mean nothing.
Yeah.
I sent you guys a snap last night where he's like, because like Sean tells a story about how probably what you might have read, Lucas, about this lightning hitting this like sword, and then Kieran asked like Jeff if it would do something to the sword, and he's like, yeah, there's something called tempering where if a sword's lit up or heated very high, it makes it harder or something. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure you have to do more to a sword than just heat it up for it to become stronger.
You can like temper stuff by heating it, but you need like consistent high heat for long periods of time.
If you're out there and
it's
you
not
wanna,
like one little quick lightning thing's gonna temper this.
Right. I was gonna say, and if you're out there and you want to temper your sword during a lightning storm, get to the highest point you can and hold the sword in your hand and wait for lightning to strike.
And tell us about what happened.
Like heating and cooling
tell us what happens
to do that.
Tell us how it went.
Parody. No children watching. Do not do that.
Yeah. If you're coming from the Planet Zoo video, do not do this.
Yeah. Right.
So, Jeff, and then last thing about the aftermath, Jeff previews Jesse James versus Al Capone and confirms, they talk about this in the show, how the car was owned by Al Capone's brother, I think.
Oh,
which is like a weird flex.
Hell yeah.
And then like Sean is like, no way. And then Jeff goes, badass.
You have to know that we actually use a Super 6 Hudson, okay, that was owned by Al Capone's brother on the show.
No.
We do. We do a drive-by shooting with a Tommy gun in this vehicle, okay? So it's very likely that Al Capone actually sat in this car.
Dude. Wow.
Yeah,
incredible.
Which I thought was really funny.
Hell yeah.
I even put the little emoji.
Jeff goes, I'm lying.
Yeah. He's like, badass. So, and it's such a Jeff thing to do, just like.
Can we steal that as our thing where at the end we say stay deadly and we go stay deadly?
Yeah. Why not? So moving on to final thoughts. I guess we'll start with Lucas and Matt, and then
Mine's pretty short.
I have a lot to say. So,
okay.
yeah.
Mine, I can get to it. So the results having Attila win is actually okay with me. Just as it's presented, because you've said before you'll drive yourself crazy if you think about it outside of exactly how the show presents it and the exact how the concept of the show. So it's a 1v1, and Alexander the Great is given 2 weapons that are absolutely useless in this 1v1 fight. And I think we kind of touched on it a little bit. The deciding factor of this fight would just be the bow. Because you count out the ballista, you count out the gastrophetus. Maybe you can take one shot with that thing before you throw it. But besides that, he has the lance and the sword. So he only has close to like what they classify as medium range. And Attila has that bow, which is long range, and he has that sword. And lasso don't care about. But he has, I think that bow, just the fact that they're on horseback and they'd be moving around a lot, and it might take, a bunch of shots, but I think that's just how Attila wins this. And it reflects in the end stats too, where it's 354 kills with the bow. I think that's pretty much just my opinion on this one. Is Alexander would win if he was given like proper weapons and like maybe address his armor more, but as the show presents it, I'm okay with Attila winning solely because of the bow. Yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
Yeah,
I hate this episode. I hate the weapons on this episode.
Craig, do you have any final thoughts to give, or do you want the final word?
I'll take the final word.
All right,
because I have a feeling what I'm going to say is pretty similar to what you're going to say.
Yeah, I wanted to mention this is one of my least favorite episodes, even going back and watching it, and a couple of reasons. Number one, they messed up on execution. And what I mean by that is the things we've already said here. I think Alexander is handicapped by being given 2 weapons that not only take his men off horseback, but are impractical for 3-on-3 or 1-on-1 or whatever.
I think that is the only reason they did that 3-on-3, just so someone could fire that ballista.
Yeah,
I feel like.
Yeah. I also don't think armor was discussed enough in this episode, especially since it was such a critical aspect in season 1. And I think these flaws do more than skew the results. I think they honestly ruin the episode because of how frustrating and illogical some of the matchups are. Lasso versus spear. The Huns probably had lances. Ballista versus. It's like, just give Alexander a bow, for God's sake. And also, I do want to say, before I move on to concept, I would quote the real Shino, because the real Shino sort of echoes my same sentiment. He ended his email at one point by saying, if X factors and armor tests were a thing, then Alexander would have won. The man makes a win, not just the weapon. In Shino's opinion, the superior battle mind of Alexander should have won out.
Which is part of why I think X Factor is so important in season 3 is because it's the person, and they don't make sense if it's just generic like ninja, but person is important.
I'm inclined to agree with Shino and you, and that's what I wanted to bring up here is this matchup I think is bad in concept. Why? Because it points out a serious flaw with these military leader duels we see on Deadliest Warrior, and that is a complete lack of strategy. Alexander the Great was successful because he was a brilliant tactician. He fought the Persians. He fought other, mounted cavalry archers similar to the Huns and were able to beat them. We see time and again on this show with guys like Sun Tzu, Napoleon, Hannibal, Genghis Khan.
Ever heard of him?
Who is Attila the Hun? Warriors known for their tactical brilliance, but this show just slaps some armor on them and gives them a sword and then sends them screaming into the maw of the enemy. And that's the problem. Deadliest Warrior is supposed to be a one-on-one duel. And you look at an episode like Spartan Ninja. What we're testing is, and obviously the show's not scientifically accurate, but what's interesting is you're looking at a warrior who's fighting with very orthodox weapons, like a spear. He's armored in bronze. And then you're looking at someone like a ninja who is not armored at all, is fighting with steel in very unorthodox ways. He's flipping around, he's throwing black eggs in your face. And there's things to test there. Does the steel penetrate the bronze? How effective is a black egg? Something like throwing glass in someone's eye. There's interesting questions to be answered. When you're sitting in the boys' locker room, which is the whole pitch of this show, like you're sitting with your friends and you're like, who would win between this and this? When someone's bringing up who would win between Alexander the Great and Attila the Hun, not one person is talking about who would win in a one-on-one duel between them. They're talking about armies. Like, you're talking about what if Alexander and his Macedonian army had to go up against someone like the Huns, or vice versa. Who would come out on top? The problem is, as Jeff says, this is not Deadliest Army, it's Deadliest Warrior. Then why bring on these people at all? Why bring on Alexander the Great if it's not Deadliest Army and if strategy plays absolutely no role on this show? That's what he's known for. It doesn't matter who would win between him and Attila in a fist fight. Who cares? This show ends up boiling down to, can Attila pepper Alexander the Great with enough arrows before Alexander can close the distance? So I think it's lame and I think it's bad in concept, and it only gets worse as we go on. They do the same thing with guys like Sun Tzu and Hannibal, where it's just like, yeah, well, his sword is worse. His armor is worse. And they mess up in concept. They mess up in execution of the episode that they do show us. And it just kind of drives me up a wall. This episode was frustrating, and yeah, I'd skip it.
Shino also says, unless you're a Spartan, if you're Greek or Roman, you lost in Deadliest Warrior.
That is true. Yeah.
So, yeah, just to maybe add on to that, one other thing in the aftermath that I didn't put in was that somebody talks about their how Alexander the Great was more on the front lines versus Attila the Hun was more behind the scenes and commanding from safety. Now I'm sure Attila was no slouch, but talking one-on-one, like that's obviously shifts things a bit one way or the other. So my thoughts are pretty similar to yours. Peter, as I mentioned, says that the Copus test, I think he also mentioned specifically like the archery. No, maybe it was Jeff, actually. I'm sorry. I think Jeff says that archery was, and their skill with archery was what really carried them. And while that's sort of true, like this isn't a perfect world, and in a perfect world, skill would come into play.
In a perfect world, men like me would not exist.
Yeah.
Insert the meme, Craig.
I don't know what that is.
I'll send the video to you.
I'll definitely put it in. So in a perfect world, like the positive attributes of the bow would carry the Attila to the win. But really, it's the inverse, where the fact that Alexander the Great essentially does not have a long-range weapon. Like with the ballista, Alexander has 3 weapons. Like, and there's no shot of using it. If you're talking like statistically, like what's in the sim, I'm sure it's terrible. Like you get 1 shot, maybe, but you're not going to hit Attila the Hun on horseback.
No.
Practically, yeah, it's even worse, where you're not going to use that. Gastrophides gets 50-some kills, which, I mean, isn't like abysmal, but very ineffective at long range. Essentially has, again, 3 weapons. So it's not so much that the Mongolian, you know what I mean? The Hun archery was
they're the same.
Was so superior as much as it's like Alexander the Great did not have any shot at long range. So that I think is more damaging than any sort of Copus test. Or any sort of skill with the Huns. It's totally a matter of Alexander having 3 weapons.
It's like that SpongeBob episode where they throw the anchors and the guy's out there to measure it, and he's like running in a circle and the shadow keeps following him. It's like 510 yards.
Yeah, that's what he needs, not a fucking ballista.
Yeah. If I can say in our defense, little how the sausage is made, we did do a double recording last week of the Roman Centurion episode and the Mongol episode, and that is why it's in my brain. That's why it's affecting us so much. Like the Romans keep coming up because of Alexander, and then the Mongols keep coming up because of the Huns.
Yeah, the Mongolian expert in the episode just did awesome, and it really stuck with me. So
fantastic host job on that one.
Yeah, wait till you get. We're like on one in a positive way in this episode. We are on one bad, like down bad in that Centurion episode.
Hey, but one of the best episodes ever should be next week. At least my favorite episode of this season.
The most coveted. Like whenever we kind of do the matchups for this and see who's going to be on what, I think you said like everybody wanted to do this episode, which surprised me. Like
without a doubt, the most like in demand episode. Everyone I was asking, they're like, "Can I be on the Jesse James episode?" And we actually ended up giving it to longtime friend of the show, RJ. Who it'll be his first time appearing. And yeah, he's going to come on and help represent Jesse James with Lucas.
Yeah, there was a waiting list for Jesse James, and it was my number 1 pick. But guess what, losers? I'm a host on the show, so I gave first dibs.
Yeah. Badass.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time for the most anticipated episode yet: Jesse James versus Al Capone. Stay deadly.